Book 5, Part 4 of On the Nature of Things by Titus Lucretius Carus, translated by William Ellery Leonard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Daniel Vimont. Book 5, Part 4. Formation of the World and Astronomical Questions. But in what modes that conflux of first stuff did found the multitudinous universe of earth and sky, and the unfathomed deeps of ocean, and courses of the sun and moon, I'll now in order tell. For of a truth, neither by counsel did the primal germs stablish themselves, as by keen act of mind, each in its proper place. Nor did they make, forsooth, a compact how each germ should move. But lo, because primordials of things, many in many modes, astir by blows from immemorial aeons, in motion too by their own weights, have evermore been wont to be so borne along, and in all modes to meet together, and to try all sorts, which, by combining one with other, they are powerful to create. Because of this, it comes to pass that those primordials, diffused far and wide through mighty aeons, the while they unions try, and motions too of every kind, meet at the last amain, and so become oft the commencements fit of mighty things, earth, sea, and sky, and race of living creatures. In that long ago, the wheel of the sun could nowhere be discerned, flying far up with its abounding blaze, nor constellations of the mighty world, nor ocean, nor heaven, nor even earth, nor air, nor aught of things like unto things of ours could then be seen, but only some strange storm, and a prodigious hurly-burly mass compounded of all kinds of primal germs, whose battling discords in disorder kept interstices and paths, coherencies and weights, and blows, encounterings, and motions, because by reason of their forms unlike and varied shapes, they could not all thuswise remain conjoined, nor harmoniously have interplay of movements. But from there, portions began to fly asunder, and like with like to join, and to block out a world, and to divide its members and dispose its mightier parts, that is, to set secure the lofty heavens from the lands, and cause the sea to spread with waters separate, and fires of ether, separate and pure, likewise to congregate apart. For lo, first came together the earthy particles, as being heavy and intertangled, there in the mid-region, and all began to take the lowest abodes. And ever the more they got one with another intertangled, the more they pressed from out their mass those particles which were to form the sea, the stars, the sun and moon, and ramparts of the mighty world. For these consist of seeds more smooth and round, and of much smaller elements than earth. And thus it was that ether, fraught with fire, first broke away from out the earthen parts, through the innumerable pores of earth, and raised itself aloft, and with itself bore lightly off the many starry fires. And not far otherwise we often see. And the still lakes and the perennial streams exhale a mist, and even as earth herself is seen at times to smoke, when first at dawn the light of the sun, the many-rayed, begins to redden into gold, over the grass begemmed with dew. When all of these are brought together overhead, the clouds on high, with now concreted body, weave a cover beneath the heavens. And thuswise ether too, light and diffusive, with concreted body on all sides spread, on all sides bent itself into a dome, and far and wide diffused on unto every region on all sides, thus hedged all else within its greedy clasp. Hard upon ether came the origins of sun and moon, whose globes revolve in air midway between the earth and mightiest ether. For neither took them, since they weighed too little to sink and settle, but too much to glide along the upmost shores. And yet they are in such a wise midway between the twain, as ever to whirl their living bodies round, and ever to dure as parts of the wide whole. In the same fashion as certain members may in us remain at rest, whilst others move. When, then, these substances had been withdrawn, amain the earth, where now extend the vast cerulean zones of all the level seas, caved in, and down along the hollows poured the whirlpools of her brine. And day by day the more the tides of ether and rays of sun on every side constrained into one mass the earth by lashing it again upon its outer edges, so that then, being thus beat upon, 'twas all condensed about its proper centre. Ever the more the salty sweat, from out its body squeezed, augmented ocean and the fields of foam by seeping through its frame. And all the more those many particles of heat and air escaping began to fly aloft and form, by condensation there, afar from earth, the high refulgent circuits of the heavens. The plains began to sink, and windy slopes of the high mountains to increase, for rocks could not subside, nor all the parts of ground settle alike to one same level there. Thus, then, the massy weight of earth stood firm with now concreted body, when, as 'twere, all of the slime of the world, heavy and gross, had run together and settled at the bottom, like lees or bilge. Then ocean, then the air, then ether herself, the fraught with fire, were all left with their liquid bodies pure and free, and each more lighter than the next below. And ether, most light and liquid of the three, floats on above the long aerial winds, nor with the brawling of the winds of air mingles its liquid body. It doth leave all there, those under realms below her heights, there to be overset in whirlwinds wild, doth leave all there to brawl in wayward gusts, whilst, gliding with a fixed impulse still, itself it bears its fires along. For lo, that ether can flow thus steadily on with one unaltered urge. The Pontus proves, that sea which floweth forth with fixed tides, keeping one onward tenor as it glides. And that the earth may there abide at rest in the mid-region of the world, it needs must vanish bit by bit in weight and lessen, and have another substance underneath, conjoined to it from its earliest age, in linked unison with the vasty worlds, realms of the air, in which it roots and lives. On this account the earth is not a load, nor presses down on winds of air beneath, even as unto a man his members be without all weight. The head is not a load unto the neck, nor do we feel the whole weight of the body to centre in the feet. But whatso weights come on us from without, weights laid upon us, these harass and chafe, though often far lighter. For to such degree it matters always what the innate powers of any given thing may be. The earth was then no alien substance fetched amain, and from no alien firmament cast down on alien air, but was conceived like air in the first origin of this the world, as a fixed portion of the same, as now our members are seen to be a part of us. Besides, the earth, when of a sudden shook by the big thunder, doth with her motion shake all that's above her, which she ne'er could do by any means, were earth not bounden fast unto the great world's realms of air and sky. For they cohere together with common roots, conjoined both, even from their earliest age, in linked unison. Ay, seest thou not that this most subtle energy of soul supports our body, though so heavy a weight? Because indeed 'tis with it so conjoined in linked unison. What power in sum can raise with agile leap our body aloft, save energy of mind which steers the limbs? Now seest thou not how powerful may be a subtle nature, when conjoined it is with heavy body, as air is with the earth conjoined, and energy of mind with us? Now let us sing what makes the stars to move. In first place, if the mighty sphere of heaven revolveth round, then needs we must aver that on the upper and the under pole presses a certain air, and from without confines them and encloseth at each end. And that, moreover, another air above streams on athwart the top of the sphere, and tends in same direction as are rolled along the glittering stars of the eternal world. Or that another still streams on below, to whirl the sphere from under, up and on in opposite direction, as we see the rivers turn the wheels and water scoops. It may be also that the heavens do all remain at rest, whilst yet are borne along the lucid constellations, either because swift tides of ether are by sky enclosed, and whirl around, seeking a passage out, and everywhere make roll the starry fires through the Samanian regions of the sky, or else because some air, streaming along from an eternal quarter off beyond, whileth the driven fires, or then because the fires themselves have power to creep along, going wherever their food invites and calls, and feeding their flaming bodies everywhere throughout the sky. Yet which of these is cause in this our world, 'tis hard to say for sure. But what can be throughout the universe, in divers worlds on divers plan create, this only do I show, and follow on to assign unto the motions of the stars even several causes, which 'tis possible exist throughout the universal all. Of which yet one must be the cause, even here, which maketh motion for our constellations. Yet to decide which one of them it be is not the least the business of a man advancing step by cautious step, as I. Nor can the sun's wheel larger be by much, nor its own blaze much less, than either seems unto our senses. For from whatso spaces fires have the power on us to cast their beams, and blow their scorching exhalations forth against our members, those same distances take nothing by those intervals away from bulk of flames, and to the sight the fire is nothing shrunken. Therefore, since the heat and the outpoured light of skiey sun arrive our senses and caress our limbs, form, too, and bigness of the sun must look, even here from earth, just as they really be, so that thou canst scarce nothing take or add. And whether the journeying moon illuminate the regions round with bastard beams, or throw from off her proper body her own light, whichever it be, she journeys with a form naught larger than the form doth seem to be which we with eyes of ours perceive. For all the far-removed objects of our gaze seem through much air confused in their look, ere minished in their bigness. Wherefore moon, since she presents bright look and clear-cut form, may there on high, by us on earth, be seen just as she is, with extreme bounds defined, and just of the size. And lastly, whatso fires of ether thou from earth beholdest, these thou mayest consider as possibly of size the least bit less, or larger by a hair than they appear. Since whatso fires we view here in the lands of earth are seen to change from time to time their size, to less or more only the least, when more or less away, so long as still they bicker clear, and still their glows perceived. Nor need there be for men astonishment that yonder sun, so small, can yet send forth so great a light as fills oceans and all the lands and sky aflood, and with its fiery exhalations steeps the world at large. For it may be indeed that one vast-flowing wellspring of the whole wide world from here hath opened and outgushed, and shot its light abroad, because thuswise the elements of fiery exhalations from all the world around together come, and thuswise flow into a bulk so big that from one single fountainhead may stream this heat and light. And seest thou not, indeed, how widely one small water-spring may wet the meadowlands at times, and flood the fields? 'Tis even possible, besides, that heat from forth the sun's own fire, albeit that fire be not a great, may permeate the air with the fierce hot, if but perchance the air be of condition and so tempered then as to be kindled, even when beat upon only by little particles of heat, just as we sometimes see the standing grain or stubble straw in conflagration all from one lone spark. And possibly the sun, agleam on high with rosy lampion, possesses about him with invisible heats a plenteous fire, by no effulgence marked, so that he maketh, he, the fraught with fire, increase to such degree the force of rays. Nor is there one sure cause revealed to men, how the sun journeys from his summer haunts on to the midmost winter turning points in Capricorn, the thence reverting veers back to solstitial goals of Cancer, nor how 'tis the moon is seen each month to cross that very distance which in traversing the sun consumes the measure of a year. I say, no one clear reason hath been given for these affairs. Yet chief in likelihood seemeth the doctrine which the holy thought of great Democritus lays down, that ever the nearer the constellations be to earth, the less can they, by whirling of the sky, be borne along, because those skyey powers of speed aloft do vanish and decrease in under regions, and the sun is thus left by degrees behind amongst those signs that follow after, since the sun he lies far down below the starry signs that blaze, and the moon lags even tardier than the sun, in just so far as is her course removed from upper heaven and nigh unto the lands, in just so far she fails to keep the pace with starry signs above, for just so far as feebler is the world that bears her on, being indeed still lower than the sun, in just so far do all the starry signs circling around o'ertake her and o'erpass. Therefore it happens that the moon appears more swiftly to return to any sign along the zodiac than doth the sun, because those signs do visit her again more swiftly than they visit the great sun. It can be also that two streams of air alternately at fixed periods blow out from transverse regions of the world, of which the one may thrust the sun away from summer signs to midmost winter goals and rigours of the cold, and the other then may cast him back from icy shades of chill, even to the heat-fraught regions and the signs that blaze along the zodiac. So, too, we must suppose the moon and all the stars, which through the mighty and sidereal years roll round in mighty orbits, may be sped by streams of air from regions alternate. Seest thou not also how the clouds be sped by contrary winds to regions contrary, the lower clouds diversely from the upper? Then why may yonder stars in ether there, along their mighty orbits, not be borne by currents opposite the one to other? But night o'erwhelms the lands with vasty murk, either when sun, after his diurnal course, hath walked the ultimate regions of the sky, and wearily hath panted forth his fires, shivered by their long journeying, and wasted by traversing the multitudinous air. Or else, because the self-same force that drave his orb along above the lands compels him then to turn his course beneath the lands. Matuta also at a fixed hour spreadeth the roseate morning out along the coasts of heaven and deploys the light, either because the selfsame sun, returning under the lands, aspires to seize the sky, striving to set it blazing with his rays ere he himself appear, or else because fires then will congregate, and many seeds of heat are wont, even at a fixed time, to stream together, gendering evermore new suns and light. Just so, the story goes, that from the Idaean mountain tops are seen dispersed fires upon the break of day, which thence combine, as 'twere, into one ball and form an orb. Nor yet in these affairs is aught for wonder that these seeds of fire can thus together stream at time so fixed, and shape anew the splendour of the sun. For many facts we see which come to pass at fixed time in all things. Burgeon shrubs at fixed time, and at a fixed time they cast their flowers. And eld commands the teeth, at time as surely fixed, to drop away. And youth commands the growing boy to bloom with a soft down, and let from both his cheeks the soft beard fall. And lastly, thunderbolts, snow, rains, clouds, winds, at seasons of the year no wise unfixed, all do come to pass. For where, even from their old primordial start, causes have ever worked in such a way, and where, even from the world's first origin, thus wise have things befallen, so even now, after a fixed order, they come round in sequence also. Likewise, days may wax whilst the nights wane, and daylight minished be whilst nights do take their augmentations, either because the selfsame sun, coursing under the lands and over in two arcs, a longer and a briefer, doth dispart the coasts of ether, and divides in twain his orbit all unequally, and adds, as round he's borne, unto the one half there, as much as from the other half he's ta'en, until he then arrives that sign of heaven where the year's node renders the shades of night equal unto the periods of light. For when the sun is midway on his course between the blasts of north wind and of south, heaven keeps his two goals parted equally, by virtue of the fixed position old of the whole starry zodiac, through which that sun, in winding onward, takes a year, illumining the sky and all the lands with oblique light. As men declare to us, who by their diagrams have charted well those regions of the sky, which be adorned with the arranged signs of zodiac. Or else, because in certain parts the air under the lands is denser, the tremulous bright beams of fire do waver tardily, nor easily can penetrate that air, nor yet emerge unto their rising place. For this it is that nights in winter time do linger long, ere comes the many-rayed round badge of the day. Or else because, as said, in alternating seasons of the year, fires, now more quick and now more slow, are wont to stream together, the fires which make the sun to rise in some one spot. Therefore it is that those men seem to speak the truth who hold a new sun is with each new daybreak born. The moon. She possibly doth shine because strook by the rays of sun, and day by day may turn unto our gaze her light, the more she doth recede from orb of sun, until facing him opposite across the world she hath with full effulgence gleamed abroad, and at her rising, as she soars above, hath there observed his setting. Thence likewise she needs must hide, as 'twere, her light behind by slow degrees, the nearer now she glides along the circle of the zodiac from her far place toward fires of yonder sun. As those men hold who feign the moon to be just like a ball, and to pursue a course betwixt the sun and earth. There is again some reason to suppose that moon may roll with light her very own, and thus display the varied shapes of her resplendence there. For near her is, per case, another body, invisible, because devoid of light, borne on and gliding all along with her, which in three modes may block and blot her disk. Again, she may revolve upon herself, like to a ball's sphere, if perchance that be, one half of her dyed o'er with glowing light, and by the revolution of that sphere she may beget for us her varying shapes, until she turns that fiery part of her full to the sight and open eyes of men. Thence, by slow stages, round and back she whirls, withdrawing thus the luminiferous part of her sphered mass and ball, as verily the Babylonian doctrine of Chaldees, refuting the art of Greek astrologers, labors in opposition to prove sure. As if, forsooth, the thing for which each fights might not alike be true, or aught there were wherefore thou mightest risk, embracing one more than the other notion. Then again, why a new moon might not forevermore created be, with fixed successions there of shapes, and with configurations fixed, and why each day that bright created moon might not miscarry, and another be in its stead and place engendered anew, 'tis hard to show by reason, or by words to prove absurd, since, lo, so many things can be create with fixed successions. Springtime and Venus come, and Venus' boy, the winged harbinger, steps on before, and hard on Zephyr's footprints Mother Flora, sprinkling the ways before them, filleth all with colours and with odours excellent. Whereafter follows arid heat, and he companioned is by Ceres, dusty one, and by the Atasian breezes of the north. Then cometh autumn on, and with him steps Lord Bacchus, and then other seasons too, and other winds do follow, the high roar of great Volturnus, and the south wind strong with thunderbolts. At last earth's shortest day bears on to men the snows, and brings again the numbing cold, and winter follows her, his teeth with chills a-chatter. Therefore 'tis the less a marvel, if at fixed time a moon is thus begotten, and again at fixed time destroyed, since things so many can come to being thus at fixed time. Likewise, the sun's eclipses and the moon's far occultations, rightly thou mayest deem as due to several causes. For indeed, why should the moon be able to shut out earth from the light of sun, and on the side to earthward thrust her high head under sun, opposing dark orb to his glowing beams? And yet, at same time, one supposed the effect could not result from some one other body which glides devoid of light forevermore. Again, why could not sun in weakened state at fixed time forelose his fires, and then, when he has passed on along the air beyond the regions hostile to his flames that quench and kill his fires, why could not he renew his light? And why should earth, in turn, have power to rob the moon of light, and there, herself on high, keep the sun hid beneath, whilst the moon glideth in her monthly course, through the rigid shadows of the cone? And yet at same time some one other body not have the power to underpass the moon, or glide along above the orb of sun, breaking his rays and outspread light asunder? And still, if moon herself refulgent be with her own sheen, why could she not at times in some one quarter of the mighty world grow weak and weary, whilst she passeth through regions unfriendly to the beams her own? End of Book 5, Part 4. Recording by Daniel Vimont, Osaka, Japan. Book 5, Part 5 of On the Nature of Things by Titus Lucretius Carus, translated by William Ellery Leonard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Daniel Vimont. Book 5, Part 5. Origins of Vegetable and Animal Life. And now, to what remains. Since I've resolved by what arrangements all things come to pass through the blue regions of the mighty world, how we can know what energy and cause started the various courses of the sun and the moon's goings, and by what far means they can succumb, the while with thwarted light, and veil with shade the unsuspecting lands, when, as it were, they blink, and then again with open eye survey all regions wide, resplendent with white radiance. I do now return unto the world's primeval age, and tell what first the soft young fields of earth with earliest parturition had decreed, to raise in air unto the shores of light, and to entrust unto the wayward winds. In the beginning, earth gave forth around the hills and over all the length of plains the race of grasses and the shining green. The flowery meadows sparkled all aglow with greening color, and thereafter, lo, unto the divers kinds of trees was given an emulous impulse mightily to shoot with a free rein aloft into the air. As feathers and hairs and bristles are begot the first on members of the 4-foot breeds, and on the bodies of the strongy winged, thus then the new earth first of all put forth grasses and shrubs, and afterward begat the mortal generations, there upsprung innumerable in modes innumerable, after diverging fashions. For from sky these breathing creatures never can have dropped, nor the land-dwellers ever have come up out of sea-pools of salt. How true remains, how merited is that adopted name of earth, the Mother, since from out the earth are all begotten, and even now arise from out the loams how many living things, concreted by the rains and heat of the sun. Wherefore 'tis less a marvel if they sprang in long ago, more many and more big, matured of those days in the fresh young years of earth and ether. First of all, the race of the winged ones and party-colored birds hatched out in springtime, left their eggs behind, as nowadays in summer tree crickets do leave their shiny husks of own accord, seeking their food and living. Then it was this earth of thine first gave unto the day the mortal generations, for prevailed among the fields abounding hot and wet, and hence where any fitting spot was given, there 'gan to grow womb cavities by roots affixed to earth. And when in ripened time the age of the young within, that sought the air and fled earth's damps, had burst these wombs, oh, then would nature thither turn the pores of earth, and make her spurt from open veins a juice like unto milk, even as a woman now is filled at childbearing with the sweet milk, because all that swift stream of aliment is thither turned unto the mother breasts. There earth would furnish to the children food. Warmth was their swaddling cloth, the grass their bed, abounding in soft down. Earth's newness, then, would rouse no dour spells of the bitter cold, nor extreme heats, nor winds of mighty powers. For all things grow and gather strength through time in like proportions, and then earth was young. Wherefore again, how merited is that adopted name of earth, the mother, since she herself begat the human race, and at one well-nigh fixed time brought forth each breast that ranges raving round about upon the mighty mountains, and all birds, aerial with many a varied shape. But lo, because her bearing years must end, she ceased, like to a woman worn by eld. For lapsing aeons change the nature of the whole wide world, and all things needs must take one status after other, nor aught persists forever like itself. All things depart. Nature, she changeth all, compelleth all to transformation. Lo, this moulders down, aslack with weary eld, and that again prospers in glory, issuing from contempt. In such wise, then, the lapsing aeons change the nature of the whole wide world, and earth taketh one status after other. And what she bore of old, she now can bear no longer, and what she never bore, she can today. In those days also the Telluric world strove to beget the monsters that upsprung, with their astounding visages and limbs. The man-woman, a thing betwixt the twain, yet neither, and from either sex remote. Some gruesome boggles, orphaned of the feet, some widowed of the hands. Dumb horrors, too, without a mouth, or blind ones of no eye. Or bulks, all shackled by their legs and arms, cleaving unto the body fore and aft. Thuswise that never could they do or go, nor shun disaster, nor take the good they would. And other prodigies and monsters earth was then begetting of this sort. In vain, since nature banned with horror their increase, and powerless were they to reach unto the coveted flower of fair maturity, or to find aliment, or to intertwine in works of Venus. For we see there must concur in life conditions manifold, if life is ever by begetting life to forge the generations one by one. First, foods must be, and next, a path whereby the seeds of impregnation in the frame may ooze, released from the members all. Last, the possession of those instruments whereby the male with female can unite, the one with other in mutual ravishments. And in the ages after monsters died, perforce there perished many a stock, unable by propagation to forge a progeny. For whatsoever creatures thou beholdest breathing the breath of life, the same have been even from their earliest age preserved alive by cunning, or by valor, or at least by speed of foot or wing. And many a stock remaineth yet because of use to man, and so committed to man's guardianship. Valor hath saved alive fierce lion breeds, and many another terrorizing race, cunning the foxes, flight the antlered stags. Light sleeping dogs, with faithful heart in breast, however, and every kind begot from seed of beasts of draught, as too the woolly flocks and horned cattle, all, my Memmius, have been committed to guardianship of men. For anxiously they fled the savage beasts, and peace they sought and their abundant foods, obtained with never labours of their own, which we secure to them as fit rewards for their good service. But those beasts, to whom nature has granted naught of these same things, beasts quite unfit by own free will to thrive, and vain for any service unto us, in thanks for which we should permit their kind to feed, and be in our protection safe. Those, of a truth, were wont to be exposed, enshackled in the gruesome bonds of doom, as prey and booty for the rest, until nature reduced that stock to utter death. But centaurs ne'er have been, nor can there be, creatures of twofold stock and double frame, compact of members alien in kind, yet formed with equal function, equal force in every bodily part. A fact thou mayest, however dull thy wits, well learn from this. The horse, when his 3 years have rolled away, flowers in his prime of vigour, but the boy not so. For oft even then he gropes in sleep after the milky nipples of the breasts, an infant still. And later, when at last the lusty powers of horses and stout limbs, now weak through lapsing life, do fail with age, lo, only then doth youth with flowering years begin for boys, and clothe their ruddy cheeks with the soft down. So never deem, percase, that from a man and from the seed of horse, the beast of draught, can centaurs be composed, or e'er exist alive, nor Scyllas be, the half-fish bodies girdled with mad dogs, nor others of this sort, in whom we mark members discordant each with each. For ne'er at one same time they reach their flower of age, or gain and lose full vigour of their frame, and never burn with one same lust of love, and never in their habits they agree, nor find the same foods equally delightsome. Sooth, as one oft may see the bearded goats batten upon the hemlock, which to man is violent poison. Once again, since flame is wont to scorch and burn the tawny bulks of the great lions, as much as other kinds of flesh and blood existing in the lands, how could it be that she, chimera lone, with triple body, fore a lion she, and aft a dragon, and betwixt a goat, might at the mouth from out the body belch infuriate flame? Wherefore the man who feigns such beings could have been engendered when earth was new and the young sky was fresh, basing his empty argument on new, may babble with like reason many whims into our ears. He'll say, perhaps, that then rivers of gold through every landscape flowed, that trees were wont with precious stones to flower, or that in those far aeons man was born with such gigantic length and lift of limbs as to be able, based upon his feet, deep oceans to bestride, or with his hands to whirl the firmament around his head. For though in earth were many seeds of things in the old time, when this Telluric world first poured the breeds of animals abroad, still that is nothing of a sign that then such hybrid creatures could have been begot, and limbs of all beasts heterogeneous have been together knit. Because indeed the divers kinds of grasses, and the grains, and the delightsome trees, which even now spring up abounding from within the earth, can still ne'er be begotten with their stems begrafted into one. But each sole thing proceeds according to its proper wont, and all conserve their own distinctions, based in nature's fixed decree. End of Book 5, Part 5. Recording by Daniel Vimont, Osaka, Japan. Book 5, Part 6 of On the Nature of Things by Titus Lucretius Carus, translated by William Ellery Leonard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Daniel Vimont. Book 5, Part 6. Origins and Savage Period of Mankind. But mortal man was then far hardier in the old champaign, as well he should be, since a hardier earth had him begotten. Builded too was he of bigger and more solid bones within, and knit with stalwart sinews through the flesh, nor easily seized by either heat or cold, or alien food, or any ail or irk. And whilst so many lustrums of the sun rolled on across the sky, men led a life after the roving habit of wild beasts. Not then were sturdy guiders of curved ploughs, and none knew then to work the fields with iron, or plant young shoots in holes of delved loam, or lop with hooked knives from off high trees the boughs of yesteryear. What sun and rains to them had given, what earth of own accord created then, was boon enough to glad their simple hearts. Mid acorn-laden oaks would they refresh their bodies for the nonce. And the wild berries of the arbute tree, which now thou seest to ripen purple-red in winter-time, the old Telluric soil would bear then more abundant and more big. And many coarse foods, too, in long ago, the blooming freshness of the rank young world produced. Enough for those poor wretches there. And rivers and springs would summon them of old to slake the thirst, as now from the great hills the water's downrush calls aloud and far the thirsty generations of the wild. So, too, they sought the grottos of the nymphs, the woodland haunts discovered as they ranged, from forth of which they knew that gliding rills with gush and splash abounding laved the rocks, the dripping rocks, and trickled from above over the verdant moss, and here and there welled up and burst across the open flats. As yet they knew not to enkindle fire against the cold, nor hairy pelts to use and clothe their bodies with the spoils of beasts, but huddled in groves and mountain caves and woods, and mongst the thickets hid their squalid backs, when driven to flee the lashings of the winds and the big rains. Nor could they then regard the general good, nor did they know to use in common any customs, any laws. Whatever of booty fortune unto each had proffered, each alone would bear away, by instinct trained for self to thrive and live. And Venus in the forests then would link the lovers' bodies, for the woman yielded either from mutual flame, or from the man's impetuous fury and insatiate lust, or from a bribe, as acorn nuts, choice pears, or the wild berries of the arbute tree. And, trusting wondrous strength of hands and legs, they'd chase the forest wanderers, the beasts, and many they'd conquer, but some few they fled, a skulk into their hiding places, with the flung stones and with the ponderous heft of gnarled branch. And by the time of night o'ertaken, they would throw, like bristly boars, their wild man's limbs naked upon the earth, rolling themselves in leaves and fronded boughs. Nor would they call with lamentations loud around the fields for daylight and the sun, quaking and wandering in shadows of the night. But, silent and buried in a sleep, they'd wait until the sun with rosy flambeau brought the glory to the sky. From childhood wont ever to see the dark and day begot in times alternate. Never might they be wildered by wild misgiving, lest a night eternal should possess the lands, with light of sun withdrawn forever. But their care was rather that the clans of savage beasts would often make their sleep-time horrible for those poor wretches. And from home driven, they'd flee their rocky shelters at approach of boar, the spumy-lipped, or lion strong, and in the midnight yield with terror up to those fierce guests their beds of outspread leaves. And yet, in those days, not much more than now, would generations of mortality leave the sweet light of fading life behind. Indeed, in those days, here and there a man, more oftener snatched upon and gulped by fangs, afforded the beasts a food that roared alive, echoing through groves and hills and forest trees, even as he viewed his living flesh entombed within a living grave, whilst those whom flight had saved, with bone and body bitten, shrieked, pressing their quivering palms to loathsome sores, with horrible voices for eternal death, until, forlorn of help, and witless what might medicine their wounds, the writhing pangs took them from life. But not in those far times would one lone day give over unto doom a soldiery in thousands marching on beneath the battle banners. Nor would then the ramping breakers of the main seas dash whole argosies and crews upon the rocks. But ocean uprisen would often rave in vain, without all end or outcome, and give up its empty menacings as lightly too. Nor soft seductions of a serene sea could lure by laughing billows any man out to disaster, for the science bold of ship-sailing lay dark in those far times. Again, 'twas then that lack of food gave o'er men's fainting limbs to dissolution. Now 'tis plenty overwhelms. Unwary, they oft for themselves would then outpour the poison. Now, with nicer art, themselves they give the draughts to others. End of Book 5, Part 6. Recording by Daniel Vimont, Osaka, Japan. Book 5, Part 7 of On the Nature of Things by Titus Lucretius Carus. Translated by William Ellery Leonard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Daniel Vimont. Book 5, Part 7. Beginnings of Civilization. Afterwards, when huts they had procured, and pelts, and fire, and when the woman, joined unto the man, withdrew with him into one dwelling place, and when they saw an offspring born from out themselves, then first the human race began to soften. For 'twas now that fire rendered their shivering frames less staunch to bear under the canopy of the sky the cold, and love reduced their shaggy hardiness, and children, with the prattle and the kiss, soon broke the parents' haughty temper down. Then, too, did neighbours gin to league as friends, eager to wrong no more, or suffer wrong, and urged for children and the womankind mercy of fathers, whilst with cries and gestures they stammered hints how meet it was that all should have compassion on the weak. And still, though concord not in every wise could then begotten be, a goodly part kept faith inviolate, or else mankind long since had been unutterably cut off, and propagation never could have brought the species down the ages. Lest perchance concerning these affairs thou ponderest in silent meditation, let me say 'twas lightning brought primevally to earth the fire for mortals, and from thence hath spread o'er all the lands the flames of heat. For thus even now we see so many objects touched by the celestial flames, to flash aglow when thunderbolt has dowered them with heat. Yet also when a many-branched tree, beaten by winds, writhes, swaying to and fro, pressing 'gainst branches of a neighbour tree, there, by the power of mighty rub and rub, is fire engendered. And at times outflares the scorching heat of flame when boughs do chafe against the trunks. And of these causes either may well have given to mortal men the fire. Next, food to cook and soften in the flame the sun instructed, since so oft they saw how objects mellowed, when subdued by warmth and by the raining blows of fiery beams through all the fields. And more each day would men more strong in sense, more wise in heart, teach them to change their earlier mode in life by fire and new devices. Kings began cities to found and citadels to set, as strongholds and asylums for themselves, and flocks and fields to portion for each man after the beauty, strength, and sense of each. For beauty, then, imported much, and strength had its own rights supreme. Thereafter wealth discovered was, and gold was brought to light, which soon of honour stripped both strong and fair. For men, however beautiful in form or valorous, will follow in the main the rich man's party. Yet, were man to steer his life by sounder reasoning, he'd own abounding riches, if with mind content he lived by thrift. For never, as I guess, is there a lack of little in the world. But men wished glory for themselves, and power, even that their fortunes on foundations firm might rest forever, and that they themselves, the opulent, might pass a quiet life. In vain, since in the strife to climb on to the heights of honour, men do make their pathway terrible, and even when once they reach them, envy, like the thunderbolt, at times will smite, hurling headlong down to murkiest Tartarus in scorn. For lo, all summits, all regions loftier than the rest, smoke, blasted as by envy's thunderbolts. So better far, in quiet, to obey, than to desire chief mastery of affairs and ownership of empires. Be it so, and let the weary sweat their lifeblood out, all to no end, battling in hate along the narrow path of man's ambition, since all their wisdom is from others' lips, and all they seek is known from what they've heard, and less from what they've thought. Nor is this folly greater today, nor greater soon to be, than 'twas of old. And therefore kings were slain, and pristine majesty of golden thrones and haughty sceptres lay o'erturned in dust, and crowns so splendid on the sovereign heads, soon bloody under the proletarian feet, groaned for their glories gone, for erst o'ermuch dreaded, thereafter with more greedy zest trampled beneath the rabble heel. Thus things down to the vilest lees of brawling mobs succumbed, whilst each man sought unto himself dominion and supremacy. So next some wiser heads instructed men to found the magisterial office, and did frame codes that they might consent to follow laws. For humankind, o'erwearied with a life fostered by force, was ailing from its feuds, and so the sooner of its own free will yielded to laws and strictest codes. For since each hand made ready in its wrath to take a vengeance fiercer than by man's fair laws is now conceded, men on this account loathed the old life fostered by force. 'Tis thence that fear of punishments defiles each prize of wicked days. For force and fraud ensnare each man around, and in the main recoil on him from whence they sprung. Not easy 'tis for one who violates by ugly deeds the bonds of common peace to pass a life composed and tranquil. For albeit he 'scape the race of gods and men, he yet must dread 'twill not be hid for ever, since indeed so many, oft babbling on amid their dreams or raving in sickness, have betrayed themselves, as stories tell, and published at last old secrets and the sins. But nature 'twas urged men to utter various sounds of tongue, and need and use did mould the names of things, about in same wise as the lack-speech years compel young children unto gesturings, making them point with finger here and there at what's before them. For each creature feels by instinct to what use to put his powers. Ere yet the bull-calf's scarce begotten horns project above his brows, with them he gins enraged to butt and savagely to thrust. But whelps of panthers and the lion's cubs, with claws and paws and bites, are at the fray already, when their teeth and claws be scarce as yet engendered. So again we see all breeds of winged creatures trust to wings, and from their fledgling pinions seek to get a fluttering assistance. Thus, to think that in those days some man apportioned round to things their names, and that from him men learned their first nomenclature, is foolery. For why could he mark everything by words, and utter the various sounds of tongue, what time the rest may be supposed powerless to do the same? And if the rest had not already one with other used words, whence was implanted in the teacher then foreknowledge of their use? And whence was given to him alone primordial faculty to know and see in mind what 'twas he willed? Besides, one only man could scarce subdue an overmastered multitude to choose to get by heart his names of things. A task not easy 'tis in any wise to teach and to persuade the deaf concerning what 'tis needful for to do. For ne'er would they allow, nor ne'er in any wise endure perpetual vain ding-dong in their ears of spoken sounds unheard before. And what at last in this affair so wondrous is, that human race, in whom a voice and tongue were now in vigour, should by divers words denote its objects, as each divers sense might prompt, since even the speechless herds, ay, since the very generations of wild beasts, are wont dissimilar and divers sounds to rouse from in them, when there's fear or pain, and when they burst with joys. And this, forsooth, 'tis thine to know from plainest facts. When first huge flabby jowls of mad Molossian hounds, baring their hard white teeth, begin to snarl, they threaten, with infuriate lips peeled back, in sounds far other than with which they bark and fill with voices all the regions round. And when, with fondling tongue, they start to lick their puppies, or do toss them round with paws, feigning with gentle bites to gape and snap, they fawn with yelps of voice far other than when, alone within the house, they bay, or, whimpering, slink with cringing sides from blows. Again, the neighing of the horse, is that not seen to differ likewise, when the stud in buoyant flower of his young years raves, goaded by winged love amongst the mares? And when, with widening nostrils, out he snorts the call to battle? And when, haply, he whinnies at times with terror-quaking limbs? Lastly, the flying race, the dappled birds, hawks, ospreys, seagulls, searching food and life amid the ocean billows in the brine, utter at other times far other cries than when they fight for food or with their prey struggle and strain. And birds there are which change with changing weather their own raucous songs, as long-lived generations of the crows or flocks of rooks, when they be said to cry for rain and water, and to call at times for winds and gales. Ergo, if divers moods compel the brutes, though speechless evermore, to send forth divers sounds, oh, truly then, how much more likely 'twere that mortal men in those days could with many a different sound denote each separate thing. And now, what cause hath spread divinities of gods abroad through mighty nations, and filled the cities full of the high altars, and led to practices of solemn rites in season, rites which still flourish in midst of great affairs of state, and midst great centres of man's civic life, the rites whence still a poor mortality is grafted that quaking awe which rears aloft still the new temples of gods from land to land, and drives mankind to visit them in throngs on holy days? 'Tis not so hard to give reason thereof in speech. Because, in sooth, even in those days would the race of man be seeing excelling visages of gods with mind awake, and in his sleeps yet more, bodies of wondrous growth. And thus to these would men attribute sense, because they seemed to move their limbs and speak pronouncements high, befitting glorious visage and vast powers. And men would give them an eternal life, because their visages for evermore were there before them, and their shapes remained, and chiefly, however, because men would not think beings augmented with such mighty powers could well by any force o'ermastered be. And men would think them in their happiness excelling far, because the fear of death vexed no one of them at all. And since at same time in men's sleeps men saw them do so many wonders, and yet feel therefrom themselves no weariness. Besides, men marked how in a fixed order rolled around the systems of the sky, and changed times of annual seasons, nor were able then to know thereof the causes. Therefore 'twas men would take refuge in consigning all unto divinities, and in feigning all was guided by their nod. And in the sky they set the seats and vaults of gods, because across the sky night and the moon are seen to roll along, moon, day, and night, and night's old awesome constellations evermore, and the night-wandering fireballs of the sky, and flying flames, clouds, and the sun, the rains, snow, and the winds, the lightnings, and the hail, and the swift rumblings, and the hollow roar of mighty menacings for evermore. O humankind unhappy, when it ascribed unto divinities such awesome deeds, and coupled thereto rigors of fierce wrath, what groans did men on that sad day beget even for themselves? And oh, what wounds for us! What tears for our children's children! Nor, O man, is thy true piety in this, with head under the veil, still to be seen to turn fronting a stone, and ever to approach unto all altars, nor so prone on earth forward to fall, to spread upturned palms before the shrines of gods, nor yet to dew altars with profuse blood of 4-foot beasts, nor vows with vows to link, but rather this: to look on all things with a master eye and mind at peace. For when we gaze aloft upon the skiey vaults of yon great world in ether, fixed high o'er twinkling stars, and into our thought there come the journeyings of sun and moon, oh, then into our breasts, o'erburdened already with their other ills, begins forthwith to rear its sudden head one more misgiving, lest o'er us, percase, it be the gods' immeasurable power that rolls with varied motion round and round the far white constellations. For the lack of aught of reasons tries the puzzled mind, whether was ever a birth-time of the world, and whether, likewise, any end shall be how far the ramparts of the world can still outstand this strain of ever-roused motion, or whether, divinely, with eternal wheel endowed, they can through endless tracts of age glide on, defying the o'ermighty powers of the immeasurable ages. Lo, what man is there whose mind with dread of gods cringes not close, whose limbs with terror-spell crouch not together, when the parched earth quakes with the horrible thunderbolt amain, and across the mighty sky the rumblings run? Do not the peoples and the nations shake? And haughty kings, do they not hug their limbs, strook through with fear of the divinities, lest for aught foully done or madly said, the heavy time be now at hand to pay? When, too, fierce force of fury winds at sea sweepeth a navy's admiral down the main with his stout legions and his elephants, doth he not seek the peace of gods with vows, and beg in prayer a-tremble lulled winds and friendly gales? In vain, since often up-caught in fury cyclones is he borne along for all his mouthings to the shoals of doom. Ah, so irrevocably some hidden power betramples for evermore affairs of men, and visibly grindeth with its heel in mire the lictors' glorious rods and axes dire, having them in derision. Again, when earth from end to end is rocking underfoot, and shaken cities ruin down, or threaten upon the verge. What wonder is it, then, that mortal generations abase themselves, and unto gods in all affairs of earth assign as last resort almighty powers and wondrous energies to govern all? Now for the rest. Copper and gold and iron discovered were, and with them silver's weight and power of lead, when with prodigious heat the conflagrations burned the forest trees among the mighty mountains, by a bolt of lightning from the sky, or else because men, warring in the woodlands, on their foes had hurled fire to frighten and dismay, or yet because, by goodness of the soil invited, men desired to clear rich fields and turn the countryside to pasture lands, or slay the wild and thrive upon the spoils. For hunting by pitfall and by fire arose before the art of hedging the covert round with net, or stirring it with dogs of chase. Howso the fact, and from what cause soever the flamy heat, with awful crack and roar, had there devoured to their deepest roots the forest trees, and baked the earth with fire, then from the boiling veins began to ooze, rivulets of silver and of gold, of lead and copper, too, collecting soon into the hollow places of the ground. And when men saw the cooled lumps anon to shine with splendor sheen upon the ground, much taken with that lustrous smooth delight, they gan to pry them out, and saw how each had got a shape like to its earthy mould. Then would it enter their heads how these same lumps, if melted by heat, could into any form or figure of things be run, and how again, if hammered out, they could be nicely drawn to sharpest points or finest edge, and thus yield to the forgers tools, and give them power to chop the forest down, to hew the logs, to shave the beams and planks, besides to bore and punch and drill. And men began such work at first as much with tools of silver and gold as with the impetuous strength of the stout copper, but vainly, since their overmastered power would soon give way, unable to endure like copper such hard labor. In those days copper it was that was the thing of price, and gold lay useless, blunted with dull edge. Now lies the copper low, and gold hath come unto the loftiest honours. Thus it is that rolling ages change the times of things. What erst was of a price becomes at last a discard of no honour, whilst another succeeds to glory, issuing from contempt, and day by day is sought for more and more, and when 'tis found, doth flower in men's praise, objects of wondrous honour. Now, Memmius, how nature of iron discovered was, thou mayest of thine own self divine. Man's ancient arms were hands and nails and teeth, stones too and boughs, breakage of forest trees, and flame and fire as soon as known. Thereafter force of iron and copper discovered was, and copper's use was known ere iron's, since more tractable its nature is, and its abundance more. With copper men to work the soil began, with copper to rouse the hurly waves of war, to straw the monstrous wounds, and seize away another's flocks and fields. For unto them, thus armed, all things naked of defence readily yielded. Then, by slow degrees, the sword of iron succeeded, and the shape of brazen sickle into scorn was turned. With iron to cleave the soil of earth they gan, and the contentions of uncertain war were rendered equal. And lo, Man was wont armed to mount upon the ribs of horse, and guide him with the rein, and play about with right hand free, ofttimes before he tried perils of war in yoked chariot. And yoked pairs abreast came earlier than yokes of four, or scythed chariots wherein to clomb the men-at-arms. And next the Punic folk did train the elephants, those cursed Lucanian oxen, hideous, the serpent-handed, with turrets on their bulks, to dure the wounds of war and panic strike the mighty troops of Mars. Thus discord sad begat the one thing after other, to be the terror of the nations under arms, and day by day to horrors of old war she added an increase. Bulls, too, they tried in war's grim business, and essayed to send outrageous boars against the foes. And some sent on before their ranks puissant lions with armed trainers and with masters fierce to guide and hold in chains, and yet in vain, since fleshed with pell-mell slaughter, fierce they flew, and blindly through the squadrons havoc wrought, shaking the frightful crests upon their heads, now here, now there. Nor could the horsemen calm their horses, panic-breasted at the roar, and rein them round to front the foe. With spring the infuriate she-lions would upleap, now here, now there, and whoso came apace against them, these they'd rend across the face, and others, unwitting from behind, they'd tear down from their mounts, and, twining round them, bring tumbling to earth, or mastered by the wound, and with those powerful fangs and hooked claws fasten upon them. Bulls would toss their friends, and trample underfoot, and from beneath rip flanks and bellies of horses with their horns, and with a threatening forehead jam the sod. And boars would gore with stout tusks their allies, splashing in fury their own blood on spears splintered in their own bodies, and would fell in rout and ruin infantry and horse. For there the beasts of saddle tried to scape the savage thrusts of tusk by shying off, or rearing up with hoofs a paw in air. In vain, since there thou mightest see them sink, their sinews severed, and with heavy fall bestrew the ground. And such of these as men supposed well trained long ago at home were, in the thick of action, seen to foam in fury from the wounds, the shrieks, the flight, the panic, and the tumult. Nor could men aught of their numbers rally, for each breed and various of the wild beasts fled apart hither or thither, as often in wars today flee those Lucanian oxen, by the steel grievously mangled, after they have wrought upon their friends so many a dreadful doom. If 'twas indeed that thus they did at all, but scarcely I'll believe that men could not with mind foreknow and see as sure to come such foul and general disaster. This we then may hold as true in the great All, in divers worlds on divers plan create, somewhere afar, more likely than upon one certain earth. But men chose this to do, less in the hope of conquering than to give their enemies a goodly cause of woe, even though thereby they perished themselves, since weak in numbers, and since wanting arms. Now clothes of roughly interplated strands were earlier than loom-wove coverings, the loom-wove later than man's iron is, since iron is needful in the weaving art. Nor by no other means can there be wrought such polished tools, the treadles, spindles, shuttles, and sounding yarn beams. And nature forced the men before the womankind to work the wool, for all the male kind far excels in skill, and cleverer is by much, until at last the rugged farmer folk jeered at such tasks, and so were eager soon to give them o'er to women's hands, and in more hardy toil to harden arms and hands. But Nature herself, mother of things, was the first seed-sower and primal grafter, since the berries and acorns, dropping from off the trees, would there, beneath, put forth in season swarms of little shoots. Hence, too, men's fondness for ingrafting slips upon the boughs, and setting out in holes the young shrubs o'er the fields. Then would they try ever new modes of tilling their loved crofts, and mark they would how earth improved the taste of the wild fruits by fond and fostering care. And day by day they'd force the woods to move still higher up the mountain, and to yield the place below for tilth, that there they might, on plains and uplands, have their meadow-plats, cisterns, and runnels, crops of standing grain, and happy vineyards, and that all along o'er hillocks, intervales, and plains might run the silvery green belt of olive trees, marking the plotted landscape. Even as now thou seest, so marked with varied loveliness all the terrain which men adorn and plant with rows of goodly fruit trees, and hedge round with thriving shrubberies sown. But by the mouth, to imitate the liquid notes of birds, was earlier far mongst men than power to make by measured song melodious verse and give delight to ears. And whistlings of the wind through the hollows of the reeds first taught the peasantry to blow into the stalks of hollow hemlock herb. Then, bit by bit, they learned sweet plainings, such as pipe outpours beaten by finger-tips of singing men, when heard through unpathed groves and forest deeps and woodsy meadows, through the untrod haunts of shepherd folk and spots divinely still. Thus time draws forward each and everything, little by little, unto the midst of men, and reason uplifts it to the shores of light. These tunes would soothe and glad the minds of mortals when sated with food, for songs are welcome then, and often, lounging with friends in the soft grass, beside a river of water, underneath the big tree's branches, merrily they'd refresh their frames, with no vast outlay, most of all if the weather were smiling, and the times of the year were painting the green of the grass around with flowers. Then jokes, then talk, then peals of jollity would circle round, for then the rustic muse was in her glory. Then would antic mirth prompt them to garland head and shoulders about with chaplets of intertwined flowers and leaves, and to dance onward, out of tune, with limbs clownishly swaying, and with clownish foot to beat our Mother Earth, from whence arose laughter and peals of jollity. For lo, such frolic acts were in their glory then, being more new and strange. And wakeful men found solaces for their unsleeping hours in drawing forth variety of notes, in modulating melodies, in running with puckered lips along the tuned reeds, whence even in our day do the watchmen guard these old traditions, and have learned well to keep true measure. And yet they no whit do get a larger fruit of gladsomeness than got the woodland aborigines in olden times. For what we have at hand, if theretofore naught sweeter we have known, that chiefly pleases and seems best of all. But then some later, likely better find, destroys its worth, and changes our desires regarding good of yesterday. And thus began the loathing of the acorn. Thus abandoned were those beds with grasses strewn and with the leaves beladen. Thus again fell into new contempt the pelts of beasts, erstwhile a robe of honor, which I guess aroused in those days envy so malign that the first wearer went to woeful death by ambuscades. And yet that hairy prize, rent into rags by greedy foemen there and splashed by blood, was ruined utterly beyond all use or vantage. Thus of old 'twas pelts, and of to-day 'tis purple and gold that cark men's lives with cares and weary with war. Wherefore, methinks, resides the greater blame with us vain men to-day. For cold would rack without their pelts the naked sons of earth. But us it nothing hurts to do without the purple vestment, broidered with gold and with imposing figures, if we still make shift with some mean garment of the plebs. So man in vain futilities toils on forever, and wastes in idle cares his years, because, of very truth, he hath not learnt what the true end of getting is, nor yet at all how far true pleasure may increase. And 'tis desire for better and for more hath carried by degrees mortality out onward to the deep, and roused up from the far bottom mighty waves of war. But sun and moon, those watchmen of the world, with their own lanterns traversing around the mighty, the revolving vault, have taught unto mankind that seasons of the years return again, and that the thing takes place after a fixed plan and order fixed. Already would they pass their life, hedged round by the strong towers, and cultivate an earth all portioned out and boundaried. Already would the sea flower and sail-winged ships. Already men had, under treaty pacts, confederates and allies, when poets began to hand heroic actions down in verse. Nor long ere this had letters been devised. Hence is our age unable to look back on what has gone before, except where reason shows us a footprint. Sailings on the seas, tillings of fields, walls, laws, and arms, and roads, dress, and the like, all prizes, all delights of finer life, poems, pictures, chiselled shapes of polished sculptures, all these arts were learned by practice and the mind's experience, as men walked forward step by eager step. Thus time draws forward each and everything, little by little, into the midst of men, and reason uplifts it to the shores of light. For one thing after other did men see grow clear by intellect, till, with their arts, they've now achieved the supreme pinnacle. End of Book 5, Part 7. Recording by Daniel Vimont, Osaka, Japan. Book 6, Part 1 of On the Nature of Things by Titus Lucretius Carus, translated by William Ellery Leonard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Daniel Vimont. Book 6, Part 1. Proem. 'Twas Athens first, the glorious in name, that whilom gave to hapless sons of men the sheaves of harvest, and reordered life, and decreed laws. And she the first that gave life its sweet solaces, when she begat a man of heart so wise, who whilom poured all wisdom forth from his truth-speaking mouth. The glory of whom, though dead, is yet to-day, because of those discoveries divine, renowned of old, exalted to the sky. For when saw he that well nigh everything which needs of man most urgently require was ready to hand for mortals, and that life, as far as might be, was established safe, that men were lords in riches, honor, praise, and eminent in goodly fame of sons, and that they yet, oh, yet within the home, still had the anxious heart which vexed life unpausingly with torments of the mind, and raved perforce with angry plaints. Then he, the master, did perceive that 'twas the vessel itself which worked the bane, and all, however wholesome, which from here or there was gathered into it, was by that bane spoilt from within, in part because he saw the vessel so cracked and leaky that nowise could ever be filled to brim, in part because he marked how it polluted with foul taste what air it got within itself. So he, the master, then by his truth-speaking words purged the breasts of men, and set the bounds of lust and terror, and exhibited the supreme good whither we all endeavor, and showed the path whereby we might arrive thereunto by a little cross-cut straight. And what of ills in all affairs of mortals upsprang, and flitted deviously about, whether by chance or force, since nature thus had destined, and from out what gates a man should sally to each combat. And he proved that mostly, vainly, doth the human race roll in its bosom the grim waves of care. For just as children tremble and fear all in the viewless dark, so even we at times dread in the light so many things that be no whit more fearsome than what children feign, shuddering, will be upon them in the dark. This terror, then, this darkness of the mind, not sunrise with its flaring spokes of light, nor glittering arrows of morning can disperse, but only nature's aspect and her law. Wherefore, the more will I go on to weave in verses this, my undertaken task. And since I've taught thee that the world's great vaults are mortal, and that sky is fashioned a frame, e'en born in time, and whatsoe'er therein go on, and must perforce go on, the most I have unravelled. What remains do thou take in besides, since once for all to climb into that chariot renowned, winds arise, and they appeased are, so that all things again which were are changed now with fury stilled. All other movements through the earth and sky which mortals gaze upon, oh, anxious oft in quaking thoughts, and which abase their minds with dread of deities, and press them crushed down to the earth, because their ignorance of cosmic causes forces them to yield all things unto the empery of gods, and to concede the kingly rule to them. For even those men who have learned full well that godheads lead a long life free of care, if yet meanwhile they wonder by what plan things can go on, and chiefly yon high things observed o'erhead on the ethereal coasts, again are hurried back unto the fears of old religion, and adopt again harsh masters deemed almighty. Wretched men, unwitting what can be and what cannot, and by what law to each its scope prescribed, its boundary stone that clings so deep in time. Wherefore the more are they borne wandering on by blindfold reason. And Memmius, unless from out thy mind thou spewest all of this, and casteth far from thee all thoughts which be unworthy gods and alien to their peace, then often will the holy majesties of the high gods be harmful unto thee, as by thy thought degraded. Not indeed that essence supreme of gods could be by this so outraged as in wrath to thirst to seek revenges keen, but even because thyself thou plaguest with the notion that the gods, even they, the calm ones in serene repose, do roll the mighty waves of wrath on wrath. Nor wilt thou enter with a serene breast shrines of the gods, nor wilt thou able be in tranquil peace of mind to take and know those images which from their holy bodies are carried into intellects of men, as the announcers of their form divine. What sort of life will follow after this, 'tis thine to see. But that afar from us veriest reason may drive such life away, much yet remains to be embellished yet in polished verses, albeit hath issued forth so much from me already. Lo, there is the law and aspect of the sky to be by reason grasped. There are the tempest times and the bright lightnings to be hymned now, even what they do, and from what cause soe'er they're borne along, that thou mayest tremble not, marking off regions of prophetic skies for auguries, oh, foolishly distraught even as to whence the flying flame hath come, or to which half of heaven it turns, or how through walled places it hath wound its way, or, after proving its dominion there, how it hath speeded forth from thence amain, whereof no wise the causes do men know, and think divinities are working there. Do thou, Calliope, ingenious muse, solace of mortals and delight of gods, point out the course before me as I race on to the white line of the utmost goal, that I may get with signal praise the crown, with thee, my guide. End of Book 6, Part 1. Recording by Daniel Vimont, Osaka, Japan. Book 6, Part 2 of On the Nature of Things by Titus Lucretius Carus, translated by William Ellery Leonard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Daniel Vimont. Book 6, Part 2. Great Meteorological Phenomena, etc. And so, in first place, then, with thunder are shaken the blue deeps of heaven, because the ethereal clouds, scudding aloft, together clash, what time 'gainst one another the winds are battling. For never a sound there comes from out the serene regions of the sky, but wheresoever in a host more dense the clouds foregather, thence more often comes a crash with mighty rumbling. And again, clouds cannot be of so condensed a frame as stones and timbers, nor again so fine as mists and flying smoke. For then, perforce, they'd either fall, borne down by their brute weight like stones, or, like the smoke, they'd powerless be to keep their mass, or to retain within frore snows and storms of hail. And they give forth, o'er skiey levels of the spreading world, a sound on high, as linen awning, stretched o'er mighty theatres, gives forth at times a cracking roar, when much 'tis beaten about betwixt the poles and crossbeams. Sometimes, too, asunder rent by wanton gusts, it raves and imitates the tearing sound of sheets of paper, even this kind of noise thou mayest in thunder hear, or sound as when winds whirl with lashings and do buffet about in air a hanging cloth and flying paper sheets. For sometimes, too, it chances that the clouds cannot together crash head on, but rather move sidewise, and with motions contrary graze each the other's body without speed, from whence that dry sound grateth on our ears, so long drawn out, until the clouds have passed from out their close positions. And again, in following wise, all things seem oft to quake at shock of heavy thunder, and mightiest walls of the wide reaches of the upper world there on the instant to have sprung apart, riven asunder. What time a gathered blast of the fierce hurricane hath all at once twisted its way into a mass of clouds, and there enclosed ever more and more compelleth by its spinning whirl the cloud to grow all hollow with a thickened crust surrounding. For thereafter, when the force and the keen onset of the wind have weakened that crust, lo, then the cloud, to split in twain, gives forth a hideous crash with bang and boom. No marvel this, since oft a bladder small, filled up with air, will, when of sudden burst, give forth a like large sound. There's reason, too, why clouds make sounds as through them blow the winds. We see, borne down the sky oft, shapes of clouds, rough-edged or branched many forky ways. And 'tis the same as when the sudden flaws of northwest wind through the dense forest blow, making the leaves to sough and limbs to crash. It happens, too, at times that roused force of the fierce hurricane too rends the cloud, breaking right through it by a front assault. For what a blast of wind may do up there is manifest from facts when here on earth a blast more gentle yet uptwists tall trees and sucks them madly from their deepest roots. Besides, among the clouds are waves, and these give, as they roughly break, a rumbling roar, as when along deep streams or the great sea breaks the loud surf. It happens, too, whenever out from one cloud into another falls the fiery energy of thunderbolt, that straightway the cloud, if full of wet, extinguishes the fire with mighty noise, as iron, white from the hot furnaces, sizzles when speedily we've plunged its glow down the cold water. Further, if a cloud more dry receive the fire, 'twill suddenly kindle to flame and burn with monstrous sound, as if a flame with whirl of winds should range along the laurel-tressed mountains far, upburning with its vast assault those trees. Nor is there aught that in the crackling flame consumes with sound more terrible to man than Delphic laurel of Apollo Lord. Oft, too, the multitudinous crash of ice and downpour of swift hail gives forth a sound among the mighty clouds on high. For when the wind hath packed them close, each mountain mass of rain cloud, there congealed utterly and mixed with hailstones, breaks and booms. Likewise, it lightens when the clouds have struck, by their collision, forth the seeds of fire, as if a stone should smite a stone or steel. For light then too leaps forth, and fire then scatters the shining sparks. But with our ears we get the thunder, after eyes behold the flash, because forever things arrive the ears more tardily than the eyes, as thou mayest see from this example too, when markest thou some man far yonder felling a great tree with double-edged axe, it comes to pass, thine eye beholds the swinging stroke before the blow gives forth a sound athrough thine ears. Thus also we behold the flashing ere we hear the thunder, which discharged is at same time with the fire, and by same cause, born of the same collision. In following wise the clouds suffuse with leaping light the lands, and the storm flashes with tremulous elan. When the wind hath invaded a cloud, and whirling there hath wrought, as I have shown above, the cloud into a hollow with a thickened crust, it becomes hot of own velocity, just as thou seest how motion will o'erheat and set ablaze all objects. Verily, a leaden ball, hurtling through length of space, even melts. Therefore, when this same wind a fire hath split black cloud, it scatters the fire seeds, which, so to say, have been pressed out by force of sudden from the cloud. And these do make the pulsing flashes of flame. Thence followeth the detonation, which attacks our ears more tardily than aught which comes along unto the sight of eyeballs. This takes place, as know thou mayest, at times when clouds are dense, and one upon the other piled aloft with wonderful upheavings. Nor be thou deceived because we see how broad their base from underneath, and not how high they tower. For make thine observations at a time when winds shall bear athwart the horizon's blue clouds like to mountain ranges moving on, or when about the sides of mighty peaks thou seest them one upon the other massed and burdening downward, anchored in high repose, with the winds sepulchred on all sides round. Then canst thou know their mighty masses, then canst view their caverns, as if builded there of beetling crags, which, when the hurricanes in gathered storm have filled utterly, then, prisoned in clouds, they rave around with mighty roarings, and within those dens bluster like savage beasts, and now from here and now from there send growlings through the clouds, and seeking an outlet, whirl themselves about, and roll from mid the clouds the seeds of fire, and heap them multitudinously there, and in the hollow furnaces within wheel flame around, until from bursted cloud in forky flashes they have gleamed forth. Again, from following cause it comes to pass that yon swift golden hue of liquid fire darts downward to the earth, because the clouds themselves must hold abundant seeds of fire. For when they be without all moisture, then they be for most part of a flamy hue and a resplendent. And indeed, they must even from the light of sun unto themselves take multitudinous seeds, and so perforce redden and pour their bright fires all abroad. And therefore, when the wind hath driven and thrust, hath forced and squeezed into one spot these clouds, they pour abroad the seeds of fire pressed out, which make to flash these colours of the flame. Likewise, it lightens also when the clouds grow rare and thin along the sky. For when the wind with gentle touch unravels them, and breaketh asunder as they move, those seeds which make the lightnings must, by nature, fall. At such an hour the horizon lightens round, without the hideous terror of dread noise and skiey uproar. To proceed apace, what sort of nature thunderbolts possess is by their strokes made manifest, and by the brand marks of their searing heat on things, and by the scorched scars exhaling round the heavy fumes of sulphur. For all these are marks, not of wind or rain, but fire. Again, they often enkindle even the roofs of houses, and inside the very rooms with swift flame hold a fierce dominion. Know thou that nature fashioned this fire subtler than fires all other, with minute and dartling bodies, a fire 'gainst which there's naught can in the least hold out. The thunderbolt, the mighty, passes through the hedging walls of houses, like to voices or a shout. Through stones, through bronze it passes, and it melts upon the instant bronze and gold, and makes likewise the wines sudden to vanish forth, the wine jars intact. Because, ye see, its heat arriving renders loose and porous readily all the wine jar's earthen sides, and winding its way within, it scattereth the elements primordial of the wine with speedy dissolution, process which even in an age the fiery steam of sun could not accomplish, however puissant he with his hot coruscations. So much more agile and overpowering is this force. Now, in what manner engendered are these things? How, fashioned of such impetuous strength as to cleave towers asunder, and houses all to overtopple, and to wrench apart timbers and beams, and heroes' monuments to pile in ruins and upheave amain, and to take breath forever out of men, and to o'erthrow the cattle everywhere. Yes, by what force the lightnings do all this and more, I will unfold to thee, nor longer keep thee in mere promises. The bolts of thunder, then, must be conceived as all begotten in those crasser clouds uppiled aloft. For from the sky serene, and from the clouds of lighter density, none are sent forth forever. That 'tis so beyond a doubt, fact plain to sense declares. To wit, at such a time the dense clouds so mass themselves through all the upper air that we might think that round about all murk had parted forth from Acheron and filled the mighty vaults of sky. So grievously, as gathers thus the storm cloud's gruesome might, do faces of black horror hang on high, when tempest begins its thunderbolts to forge. Besides, full often also out at sea a blackest thunderhead, like cataract of pitch hurled down from heaven, and far away bulging with murkiness, down on the waves falls with fast uproar, and draws on amain the darkling tempests, big with thunderbolts and hurricanes, itself the while so crammed tremendously with fires and winds that even back on the lands the people shudder round and seek for cover. Therefore, as I said, the storm must be conceived as o'er our head towering most high, for never would the clouds o'erwhelm the lands with such a massy dark, unless upbuilded heap on lofty heap, to shut the round sun off. Nor could the clouds, as on they come, engulf with rain so vast as thus to make the rivers overflow and fields to float, if ether were not thus furnished with lofty piled clouds. Lo then, here be all things fulfilled with winds and fires, hence the long lightnings and the thunders loud. For verily, I've taught thee even now how cavernous clouds hold seeds innumerable of fiery exhalations, and they must from off the sunbeams and the heat of these take many still. And so, when that same wind, which haply into one region of the sky collects those clouds, hath pressed from out the same the many fiery seeds, and with that fire hath at the same time intermixed itself, oh, then and there that wind, A whirlwind now, deep in the belly of the clouds, spins round in narrow confines, and sharpens there inside, in glowing furnaces, the thunderbolt. For in a twofold manner is that wind enkindled all. It trembles into heat both by its own velocity and by repeated touch of fire. Thereafter, when the energy of wind is heated through, and the fierce impulse of the fire hath sped deeply within, O then the thunderbolt, now ripened, so to say, doth suddenly splinter the cloud, and the aroused flash leaps onward, lumining with forky light all places round. And followeth anon a clap so heavy that the skiey vaults, as if asunder burst, seem from on high to engulf the earth. Then, fearfully, a quake pervades the lands, and long the lofty skies run the far rumblings. For at such a time nigh the whole tempest quakes, shook through, and roused are the roarings. From which shock comes such resounding and abounding rain, that all the murky ether seems to turn now into rain, and as it tumbles down, to summon the fields back to primeval floods. So big the rains that be sent down on men by burst of cloud and by the hurricane, what time the thunderclap from burning bolt that cracks the cloud flies forth along. At times the force of wind, excited from without, smiteth into a cloud already hot with a ripe thunderbolt. And when that wind hath splintered that cloud, then down there cleaves forthwith yon fiery coil of flame which still we call, even with our father's word, a thunderbolt. The same thing haps toward every other side whither that force hath swept. It happens, too, that sometimes force of wind, though hurtled forth without all fire, yet in its voyage through space igniteth, whilst it comes along, losing some larger bodies which cannot pass, like the others, through the bulks of air, and, scraping together out of air itself some smaller bodies, carries them along, and these, commingling by their flight, make fire. Much in the manner as oft a leaden ball grows hot upon its airy course, the while it loseth many bodies of stark cold, and taketh into itself along the air new particles of fire. It happens, too, that force of blow itself arouses fire, when force of wind, a cold and hurtled forth without all fire, hath strook somewhere amain. No marvel, because when with terrific stroke 'thas smitten, the elements of fiery stuff can stream together from out the very wind, and simultaneously from out that thing which then and there receives the stroke. As flies the fire when with the steel we hack the stone. Nor yet, because the force of steel's a cold, rush the less speedily together there under the stroke its seeds of radiance hot. And therefore thuswise must an object too be kindled by a thunderbolt, if haply 'thas been adapt and suited to the flames. Yet force of wind must not be rashly deemed as altogether and entirely cold. That force which is discharged from on high with such stupendous power. But if 'tis not upon its course already kindled with fire, it yet arriveth warmed and mixed with heat. And now the speed and stroke of thunderbolt is so tremendous, and with glide so swift those thunderbolts rush on and down, because their roused force itself collects itself first always in the clouds, and then prepares for the huge effort of their going forth. Next, when the cloud no longer can retain the increment of their fierce impetus, their force is pressed out, and therefore flies with impetus so wondrous, like to shots hurled from the powerful Roman catapults. Note, too, this force consists of elements both small and smooth, nor is there aught that can with ease resist such nature, for it darts between and enters through the pores of things, and so it never falters in delay, despite innumerable collisions, but flies, shooting onward with a swift elan. Next, since by nature always every weight bears downward, doubled is the swiftness then, and that elan is still more wild and dread when verily to weight are added blows, so that more madly and more fiercely then the thunderbolt shakes into shivers all that blocks its path, following on its way. Then, too, because it comes along with one continuing elan, it must take on velocity anew, which still increases as it goes, and ever augments the bolt's vast powers, and to the blow gives larger vigor. For it forces all of the thunder's seeds of fire to sweep in a straight line unto one place, as 'twere, casting them one by other as they roll into that onward course. Again, perchance, in coming along, it pulls from out the air some certain bodies, which by their own blows enkindle its velocity. And lo, it comes through objects, leaving them unharmed. It goes through many things and leaves them whole, because the liquid fire flieth along through their pores. And much it does transfix, when these primordial atoms of the bolt have fallen upon the atoms of these things precisely where the intertwined atoms are held together. And further, easily brass it unbinds, and quickly fuseth gold, because its force is so minutely made of tiny parts and elements so smooth that easily they wind their way within, and, when once in, quickly unbind all knots and loosen all the bonds of union there. And most in autumn is shaken the house of heaven, the house so studded with the glittering stars and the whole earth around. Most, too, in spring, when flowery times unfold themselves. For lo, in the cold season is there lack of fire, and winds are scanty in the hot, and clouds have not so dense a bulk. But when indeed the seasons of heaven are betwixt these twain, the divers causes of the thunderbolt then all concur. For then both cold and heat are mixed in the cross seas of the year, so that a discord rises among things, and air in vast tumultuosity billows, infuriate with the fires and winds, of which the both are needed by the cloud for fabrication of the thunderbolt. For the first part of heat and last of cold is the time of spring, wherefore must things unlike do battle one with other, and when mixed tumultuously rage. And when rolls around the latest heat mixed with the earliest chill, the time which bears the name of autumn, then likewise fierce cold spells wrestle with fierce heats. On this account these seasons of the year are nominated cross seas. And no marvel if in those times the thunderbolts prevail, and storms are roused turbulent in heaven, since then both sides in dubious warfare rage tumultuously, the one with flames, the other with winds, and with waters mixed with winds. This it is, O Memmius, to see through the very nature of fire-fraught thunderbolt. Oh, this it is to mark by what blind force it maketh each effect, and not, oh, not to unwind Etrurian scrolls oracular, inquiring tokens of occult will of gods, even as to whence the flying flame hath come, or to which half of heaven it turns, or how through walled places it hath wound its way, or, after proving its dominion there, how it hath speeded forth from thence amain, or what the thunderstroke portends of ill from out high heaven. But if Jupiter and other gods shake those refulgent vaults with dread reverberations, and hurl fire whither it pleases each, why smite they not mortals of reckless and revolting crimes, that such may pant from a transpierced breast forth flames of the red levin, unto men a drastic lesson? Why is rather he, he, self-conscious of no foul offence, involved in flames, though innocent, and clasped, up-caught in skiey whirlwind and in fire? Nay, why then aim they at eternal wastes, and spend themselves in vain? Perchance even so to exercise their arms and strengthen shoulders? Why suffer they the Father's javelin to be so blunted on the earth? And why doth he himself allow it, nor spare the same even for his enemies? Oh, why, most oft, aims he at lofty places? Why behold we marks of his lightnings most on mountain tops? Then for what reason shoots he at the sea? What sacrilege have waves, and bulk of brine, and floating fields of foam been guilty of? Besides, if 'tis his will that we beware against the lightning stroke, why feareth he to grant us power for to behold the shot? And, contrariwise, if wills he to o'erwhelm us, quite off our guard, with fire, why thunders he off in yon quarter, so that we may shun? Why rouseth he beforehand darkling air, and the far din and rumblings? And how canst thou believe he shoots at one same time into diverse directions? Or darest thou contend that never hath it come to pass that divers strokes have happened at one time? But oft and often hath it come to pass, and often still it must, that even as showers and rains o'er many regions fall, so too dart many thunderbolts at one same time. Again, why never hurtles Jupiter a bolt upon the lands, nor pours abroad clap upon clap, when skies are cloudless all? Or say, doth he, so soon as ever the clouds have come thereunder, then into the same descend in person, that from thence he may near by decide upon the stroke of shaft? And lastly, why with devastating bolt shakes he asunder holy shrines of gods, and his own thrones of splendor, and breaks the well-wrought idols of divinities, and robs of glory his own images by wound of violence? But to return apace, easy it is from these same facts to know in just what wise those things, which from their sort the Greeks have named bellows, do come down discharged from on high upon the seas. For it haps that sometimes from the sky descends upon the seas a column, as if pushed, round which the surges seethe, tremendously aroused by puffing gusts. And whatsoe'er of ships are caught within that tumult, then come into extreme peril, dashed along. This haps when sometimes wind's aroused force can't burst the cloud it tries to, but down weighs that cloud, until 'tis like a column from sky upon the seas pushed downward gradually, as if a somewhat from on high were shoved by fist and nether thrust of arm, and lengthened far to the waves. And when the force of wind hath rived this cloud, from out the cloud it rushes down on the seas, and starts among the waves a wondrous seething, for the eddying whirl descends, and downward draws along with it that cloud of ductile body. And soon as ever 'thas shoved unto the levels of the main that laden cloud, the whirl suddenly then plunges its whole self into the waters there, and rouses all the sea with monstrous roar, constraining it to seethe. It happens, too, that very vortex of the wind involves itself in clouds, scraping from out the air the seeds of cloud, and counterfeits, as 'twere, the bellows pushed from heaven. And when this shape hath dropped upon the lands and burst apart, it belches forth immeasurable might of whirlwind and of blast. Yet, since 'tis formed at most but rarely, and on land the hills must block its way, 'tis seen more oft out there, on the broad prospect of the level main, along the free horizons. Into being the clouds condense, when, in this upper space of the high heaven, have gathered suddenly, as round they flew, unnumbered particles, worlds rougher ones, which can, though interlinked with scanty couplings, yet be fastened firm, the one on other caught. These particles first cause small clouds to form, and thereupon these catch the one on other, and swarm in a flock, and grow by their conjoining, and by winds are borne along, until collects the tempest fury. Happens, too, the nearer the mountain summits neighbor to the sky, the more unceasingly their far crags smoke with a thick darkness of swart cloud, because, when first the mists do form, ere ever the eyes can there behold them, tenuous as they be, the carrier winds will drive them up and on unto the topmost summits of the mountain. And then at last it happens, when they be in vaster throng upgathered, that they can by this very condensation lie revealed, and that at same time they are seen to surge from very vertex of the mountain up into far ether. For very fact and feeling, as we upclimb high mountains, proveth clear that windy are those upward regions free. Besides, the clothes hung out along the shore, when in they take the clinging moisture, prove that nature lifts from over all the sea unnumbered particles, whereby the more 'tis manifest that many particles, even from the salt upheavings of the main, can rise together to augment the bulk of massed clouds. For moistures in these twain are near akin. Besides, from out all rivers, as well as from the land itself, we see uprising mists and steam, which like a breath are forced out from them and borne aloft, to curtain heaven with their murk, and make, by slow foregathering, the skiey clouds. For in addition, lo, the heat on high of constellated ether burdens down upon them, and by sort of condensation weaveth beneath the azure firmament the reek of darkling cloud. It happens, too, that hither to the skies from the beyond do come those particles which make the clouds and flying thunderheads. For I have taught that this their number is innumerable and infinite the sum of the abyss. And I have shown with what stupendous speed those bodies fly, and how they're wont to pass amain through incommunicable space. Therefore 'tis not exceeding strange, if oft, in little time, tempest and darkness cover with bulking thunderheads hanging on high the oceans and the lands, since everywhere, through all the narrow tubes of yonder ether, yea, so to speak, through all the breathing holes of the great upper world encompassing, there be, for the primordial elements, exits and entrances. Now come, and how the rainy moisture thickens into being in the lofty clouds, and how upon the lands 'tis then discharged in downpour of large showers, I will unfold. And first, triumphantly will I persuade thee that uprise together, with clouds themselves, full many seeds of water from out all things, and that they both increase, both clouds and water which is in the clouds, in like proportion, as our frames increase in like proportion with our blood, as well as sweat or any moisture in our members. Besides, the clouds take in from time to time much moisture risen from the broad marine, whilst the winds bear them o'er the mighty sea like hanging fleeces of white wool. Thuswise, even from all rivers is there lifted up moisture into the clouds. And when therein the seeds of water, so many, in many ways have come together, augmented from all sides, the close-jammed clouds then struggle to discharge their rainstorms for a twofold reason. Lo, the wind's force crowds them, and the very excess of storm clouds, massed in a vaster throng, giveth an urge and pressure from above, and makes the rains outpour. Besides when, too, the clouds are winnowed by the winds, or scattered, smitten on top by heat of sun, they send their rainy moisture, and distil their drops, even as the wax, by fiery warmth on top, wasteth and liquefies abundantly. But comes the violence of the bigger rains, when violently the clouds are weighted down, both by their cumulated mass and by the onset of the wind. And rains are wont to endure a while, and to abide for long, when many seeds of waters are aroused, and clouds on clouds, and racks on racks outstream in piled layers, and are borne along from every quarter, and when all the earth, smoking, exhales her moisture. At such a time, when sun with beams amid the tempest murk hath shone against the showers of black rains, then in the swart clouds there emerges bright the radiance of the bow. And as to things not mentioned here, which of themselves do grow, or of themselves are gendered, and all things which in the clouds condense to being, all snow and the winds, hail and the hoarfrost's chill, and freezing, mighty force, of lakes and pools the mighty hardener, and mighty check which in the winter curbeth everywhere the rivers as they go. 'Tis easy still, soon to discover and with mind to see how they all happen, whereby gendered. When once thou well hast understood just what functions have been vouchsafed from of old unto the procreant atoms of the world. Now come, and what the law of earthquakes is, hearken. And first of all, take care to know that the under earth, like to the earth around us, is full of windy caverns all about, and many a pool and many a grim abyss she bears within her bosom. Ay, and cliffs and jagged scarps, and many a river, hid beneath her chine, rolls rapidly along its billows and plunging boulders. For clear fact requires that earth must be in every part alike in constitution. Therefore earth, with these things underneath affixed and set, trembleth above, jarred by big down-tumblings, when time hath undermined the huge caves, the subterranean. Yea, whole mountains fall, and instantly from spot of that big jar there quiver the tremors far and wide abroad. And with good reason, since houses on the street begin to quake throughout when jarred by a cart of no large weight. And, too, the furniture within the house upbounds when a paving block gives either iron rim of the wheels a jolt. It happens, too, when some prodigious bulk of age-worn soil is rolled from mountain slopes into tremendous pools of water dark, that the reeling land itself is rocked about by the water's undulations, as a basin sometimes won't come to rest until the fluid within it ceases to be rocked about in random undulations. And besides, when subterranean winds, upgathered there in the hollow deeps, bulk forward from one spot, and press with the big urge of mighty powers against the lofty grottos, then the earth bulks to that quarter whither push amain the headlong winds. Then all the builded houses above ground, and the more the higher upreared unto the sky, lean ominously, careening into the same direction, and the beams, wrenched forward, overhang, ready to go. Yet dread men to believe that there awaits the nature of the mighty world a time of doom and cataclysm, albeit they see so great a bulk of lands to bulge and break. And lest the winds blew back again, no force could rein things in, nor hold from sure career on to disaster. But now, because those winds blow back and forth in alternation strong, and, so to say, rallying, charge again, and then repulsed, retreat, on this account earth oftener threatens than she brings to pass collapses dire. For to one side she leans, then back she sways, and after tottering forward, recovers then her seats of poise. Thus, this is why whole houses rock, the roofs more than the middle stories, middle more than lowest, and the lowest least of all. Arises, too, this same great earth-quaking, when wind and some prodigious force of air, collected from without or down within the old Telluric deeps, have hurled themselves amain into those caverns subterrane, and there at first tumultuously chafe among the vasty grottos, borne about in mad rotations, till their lashed force aroused outbursts abroad, and then and there, riving the deep earth, makes a mighty chasm. What once in Syrian Sidon did befall, and once in Peloponnesian Aegium, twain cities which such outbreak of wild air and earth's convulsion following hard upon o'erthrew of old. And many a walled town besides hath fall'n by such omnipotent convulsions on the land, and in the sea engulfed hath sunken many a city down with all its populace. But if indeed they burst not forth, yet is the very rush of the wild air and fury force of wind then dissipated, like an ague fit, through the innumerable pores of earth, to set her all a-shake, even as a chill, when it hath gone into our marrow bones, sets us convulsively, despite ourselves, a-shivering and a-shaking. Therefore men with twofold terror bustle in alarm through cities to and fro. They fear the roofs above the head, and underfoot they dread the caverns, lest the nature of the earth suddenly rend them open, and she gape, herself asunder, with tremendous maw, and all confounded seek to chock it full with her own ruins. Let men, then, go on feigning at will that heaven and earth shall be inviolable, entrusted evermore to an eternal weal. And yet at times the very force of danger here at hand prods them on some side with this goad of fear, this among others, that the earth, withdrawn abruptly from under their feet, be hurried down, down into the abyss, and the sum of things be following after, utterly fordone, till be but wrack and wreckage of a world. End of Book 6, Part 2. Recording by Daniel Vimont, Osaka, Japan. Book 6, Part 3 of On the Nature of Things by Titus Lucretius Carus, translated by William Ellery Leonard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Daniel Vimont. Book 6, Part 3, Extraordinary and Paradoxical Telluric Phenomena. In chief, men marvel nature renders not bigger and bigger the bulk of ocean, since so vast the downrush of the waters be, and every river out of every realm cometh thereto, and add the random rains and flying tempests which spatter every sea and every land bedew, add their own springs. Yet all of these unto the ocean sum shall be but as the increase of a drop. Wherefore 'tis less a marvel that the sea, the mighty ocean, increaseth not. Besides, sun with his heat draws off a mighty part. Yea, we behold that sun with burning beams to dry our garments, dripping all with wet. And many a sea, and far outspread beneath, do we behold. Therefore, however slight the portion of wet that sun on any spot culls from the level main, he still will take from off the waves in such a wide expanse abundantly. Then further, also winds, sweeping the level waters, can bear off a mighty part of wet, since we behold oft in a single night the highways dried by winds, and soft mud crusted o'er at dawn. Again, I've taught thee that the clouds bear off much moisture too, uptaken from the reaches of the mighty main, and sprinkle it about o'er all the zones, when rain is on the lands, and winds convey the airy racks of vapor. Lastly, since earth is porous through her frame, and neighbors on the seas, girdling their shores, the waters wet must seep into the lands from briny ocean, as from lands it comes into the seas. For brine is filtered off, and then the liquid stuff seeps back again, and all repoureth at the river heads, whence in fresh-water currents it returns over the lands, adown the channels which were cleft erstwhile, and erstwhile bore along the liquid-footed floods. And now the cause whereby, through the throat of Aetna's mount, such vast tornado fires outbreathe at times, I will unfold. For with no middling might of devastation the flamy tempest rose, and held dominion in Sicilian fields, drawing upon itself the upturned faces of neighboring clans, what time they saw afar the skiey vaults affume and sparkling all, and filled their bosoms with dread anxiety of what new thing nature were travailing at. In these affairs it much behoveth thee to look both wide and deep, and far abroad to peer to every quarter, that thou mayest remember how boundless is the sum of things, and mark how infinitely small a part of the whole sum is this one sky of ours. Oh, not so large a part as is one man of the whole earth. And plainly, if thou viewest this cosmic fact, placing it square in front, and plainly understandest, thou wilt leave wondering at many things. For who of us wondereth if someone gets into his joints a fever, gathering head with fiery heat, or any other dolorous disease along his members, For anon the foot grows blue and bulbous. Often the sharp twinge seizes the teeth, attacks the very eyes. Out breaks the sacred fire, and crawling on over the body, burneth every part it seizeth on, and works its hideous way along the frame. No marvel this, since lo, of things innumerable be seeds enough, and this our earth and sky do bring to us enough of bane, from whence can grow the strength of maladies uncounted. Thus wise, then, we must suppose to all the sky and earth are ever supplied from out the infinite all things, all in stores enough whereby the shaken earth can of a sudden move, and fierce typhoons can over sea and lands go tearing on, and Aetna's fires o'erflow, and heaven become a flame burst. For that, too, happens at times, and the celestial vaults glow into fire, and rainy tempests rise in heavier congregation, when percase the seeds of water have foregathered thus from out the infinite. Ay, but passing huge the fiery turmoil of that conflagration. So sayest thou. Well, huge many a river seems to him that erstwhile ne'er a larger saw. Thus huge seems tree or man, and everything which mortal sees the biggest of each class, that he imagines to be huge. Though yet all these, with sky and land and sea to boot, are all as nothing to the sum entire of the all-sum. But now I will unfold at last how yonder suddenly angered flame outblows abroad from vasty furnaces Aetnian. First, the mountain's nature is all under hollow, propped about with caverns of basaltic piers. And lo, in all its grottos be there wind and air. For wind is made when air hath been uproused by violent agitation. When this air is heated through and through, and raging round, hath made the earth and all the rocks it touches horribly hot, and hath struck off from them fierce fire of swiftest flame, it lifts itself and hurtles thus straight upwards through its throat into high heaven, and thus bears on afar its burning blasts, and scattereth afar its ashes, and rolls a smoke of pitchy murk, and heaveth the while boulders of wondrous weight, leaving no doubt in thee that 'tis the air's tumultuous power. Besides, in mighty part, the sea, there at the roots of that same mount, breaks its old billows and sucks back its surf. And grottos from the sea pass in below, even to the bottom of the mountain's throat. Herethrough, thou must admit, there go, and the conditions force the water and air deeply to penetrate from the open sea, and to outblow abroad, and to upbear thereby the flame, and to upcast from deeps the boulders, and to rear the clouds of sand. For at the top be bowls, as people there are wont to name what we at Rome do call the throats and mouths. There be besides something of which 'tis not enough one only cause to state, but rather several, whereof one will be the true. Lo, if thou shouldst espy lying afar some fellow's lifeless corse, 'twere meet to name all causes of a death, that cause of his death might thereby be named. For prove thou mayest he perished not by steel, by cold, nor even by poison nor disease, Yet somewhat of this sort hath come to him, we know, and thus we have to say the same in divers cases. Toward the summer, Nile waxeth and overfloweth the champaign, unique in all the landscape, river soul of the Egyptians. In mid-season heats often, and oft he waters Egypt o'er, either because in summer against his mouths come those north winds, which at that time of year men name the Etesian blasts, and blowing thus upstream retard, and forcing back his waves, fill him o'er full, and force his flow to stop. For out of doubt these blasts, which driven be from icy constellations of the pole, are borne straight up the river. Comes that river from forth the sultry places down the south, rising far up in midmost realm of day, among black generations of strong men with sun-baked skins. 'Tis possible, besides, that a big bulk of piled sand may bar his mouths against his onward waves, when sea, wild in the winds, tumbles the sand to inland, whereby the river's outlet were less free, likewise less headlong his descending floods. It may be, too, that in this season rains are more abundant at its fountainhead, because the Etesian blasts of those north winds then urge all clouds into those inland parts, and soothly, when they're thus foregathered there, urged yonder into midmost realm of day, then, crowded against the lofty mountain-sides, they're massed and powerfully pressed. Again, perchance his waters wax, far away, among the Ethiopians' lofty mountains, when the all-beholding sun, with thawing beams, drives the white snows to flow into the vales. Now come, and unto thee I will unfold, as to the birdless spots and birdless tarns, what sort of nature they are furnished with. First, as to name of birdless, that derives from very fact because they noxious be unto all birds. For when above those spots in horizontal flight the birds have come, forgetting to oar with wings, they furl their sails, and with down-drooping of their delicate necks fall headlong into earth, if haply such the nature of the spots, or into water, if haply spreads thereunder birdless tarn. Such spots at Cumai, where the mountains smoke, charged with the pungent sulphur, and increased with steaming springs. And such a spot there is within the walls of Athens, even there on summit of Acropolis, beside fane of Tritonian palace bountiful, where never cawing crows can wing their course, not even when smoke the altars with good gifts, but evermore they flee, yet not from wrath of Pallas, grieved at that espial old, as poets of the Greeks have sung the tale, but very nature of the place compels. In Syria also, as men say, a spot is to be seen, where also 4-foot kinds, as soon as ever they've set their steps within, collapse, or come by its essential power, as if they're slaughtered to the under-gods. Lo, all these wonders work by natural law, and from what causes they are brought to pass, the origin is manifest. So haply let none believe that in these regions stands the gate of Orcus, nor us then suppose, haply, that thence the under-gods draw down souls to dark shores of Acheron, as stags, the wing-footed, are thought to draw to light by sniffing nostrils from their dusky lairs the wriggling generations of wild snakes. How far removed from true reason is this, perceive thou straight. For now, I'll try to say somewhat about the very fact. And first, this do I say, as oft I've said before. In earth are atoms of things of every sort. And know, these all thus rise from out the earth. Many life-giving, which be good for food, and many which can generate disease and hasten death. Oh, many primal seeds, of many things in many modes, since earth contains them mingled, and gives forth discrete. And we have shown before that certain things be unto certain creatures suited more for ends of life, by virtue of a nature, a texture, and primordial shapes, unlike for kinds alike. Then, too, 'tis thine to see how many things oppressive be and foul to man, and to sensation most malign. Many meander miserably through ears. Many inwind through the nostrils, too, malign and harsh when mortal draws a breath. Of not a few must one avoid the touch. Of not a few must one escape the sight. And some there be, all loathsome to the taste. And many besides relax the languid limbs along the frame, and undermine the soul in its abodes within. To certain trees there hath been given so dolorous a shade, that often they gender achings of the head, if one but be beneath, outstretched on the sward. There is again, on Helicon's high hills, a tree that's wont to kill a man outright by fetid odor of its very flower. And when the pungent stench of the night lamp, extinguished but a moment since, assails the nostrils, then and there it puts to sleep a man afflicted with the falling sickness and foamings at the mouth. A woman, too, at the heavy castor drowses back in chair, and from her delicate fingers slips away her gaudy handiwork, if haply she hath got the whiff at menstruation time. Once more, if thou delayest in hot baths when thou art over full, how readily from stool in middle of the steaming water thou tumblest in a fit! How readily the heavy fumes of charcoal wind their way into the brain, unless beforehand we of water have drunk. But when a burning fever, or mastering man, hath seized upon his limbs, then odor of wine is like a hammer blow. And seest thou not how in the very earth sulphur is gendered, and bitumen thickens with noisome stench? What direful stenches, too, Scaptensula outbreathes from down below, when men pursue the veins of silver and gold, with pickaxe probing round the hidden realms deep in the earth. Or what of deadly bane the mines of gold exhale. Oh, what a look, and what a ghastly hue they give to men! And seest thou not, or hearest, how they're wont in little time to perish, and how fail the life-stores in those folk, whom mighty power of grim necessity confineth there in such a task? Thus this telluric earth outstreams with all these dread effluvia, and breathes them out into the open world, and into the visible regions under heaven. Thus, too, those birdless places must upsend an essence bearing death to winged things, which from the earth rises into the breezes to poison part of skiey space. And when thither the winged is on pennons borne, there, seized by the unseen poison, 'tis ensnared, and from the horizontal of its flight drops to the spot whence sprang the effluvium. And when 'thas there collapsed, then the same power of that effluvium takes from all its limbs the relics of its life. That power first strikes the creatures with a wildering dizziness, and then thereafter, when they're once down fallen into the poison's very fountains, then life too they vomit out perforce, because so thick the stores of bane around them fume. Again, at times it happens that this power, this exhalation of the birdless places, dispels the air betwixt the ground and birds, leaving well-nigh a void. And thither, when in horizontal flight the birds have come, forthwith their buoyancy of pennons limps, all useless, and each effort of both wings falls out in vain. Here, when without all power to buoy themselves and on their wings to lean, lo, nature constrains them by their weight to slip down to the earth, and lying prostrate there along the well-nigh empty void, they spend their souls through all the openings of their frame. Further, the water of wells is colder than at summer time, because the earth by heat is rarefied, and sends abroad in air whatever seeds it peradventure have of its own fiery exhalations. The more, then, the telluric ground is drained of heat, the colder grows the water hid within the earth. Further, when all the earth is by the cold compressed, and thus contracts, and, so to say, concretes, it happens, lo, that by contracting it expresses then into the wells what heat it bears itself. 'Tis said at Hammon's fane a fountain is, in daylight cold, and hot in time of night. This fountain men bewonder overmuch, and think that suddenly it seethes in heat by intense sun, the subterranean, when night with her terrible murk hath cloaked the lands. What's not true reasoning by a long remove. I'faith, when sun or head, touching with beams an open body of water, had no power to render it hot upon its upper side, though his high light possess such burning glare, how then can he, when under the gross earth, make water boil and glut with fiery heat? And specially, since scarcely potent he through hedging walls of houses to inject his exhalations hot with ardent rays. What then's the principle? Why, this indeed. The earth about that spring is porous more than elsewhere the telluric ground, and be many the seeds of fire hard by the water. On this account, when night with dew-fraught shades hath whelmed the earth, anon the earth deep down grows chill, contracts, and thuswise squeezes out into the spring what seeds she holds of fire, as one might squeeze with fist, which render hot the touch and steam of the fluid. Next, when sun, uprisen, with his rays has split the soil, and rarefied the earth with waxing heat, again into their ancient abodes return the seeds of fire, and all the hot of water into the earth retires. And this is why the fountain in the daylight gets so cold. Besides, the water's wet is beat upon by rays of sun, and with the dawn becomes rarer in texture under his pulsing blaze. And therefore, whatso seeds it holds of fire, it renders up, even as it renders oft the frost that it contains within itself, and thaws its ice and looseneth the knots. There is, moreover, a fountain, cold in kind, that makes a bit of tow above it held take fire forthwith and shoot a flame. So, too, a pitch-pine torch will kindle and flare round along its waves, wherever 'tis impelled, afloat before the breeze. No marvel this, because full many seeds of heat there be within the water, and from earth itself out of the deeps must particles of fire through the entire fountain surge aloft, and speed in exhalations into air, forth and abroad. Yet not in numbers enow as to make hot the fountain. And moreover, some force constrains them, scattered through the water, forthwith to burst abroad, and to combine in flame above. Even as a fountain far there is at Aradus amid the sea, which bubbles out sweet water and disparts from round itself the salt waves. And behold, in many another region the broad main yields to the thirsty mariners timely help, belching sweet waters forth amid salt waves. Just so, then, can those seeds of fire burst forth through that other fount, and bubble out abroad against the bit of tow. And when they there collect or cleave unto the torch, forthwith they readily flash aflame, because the tow and torches also in themselves have many seeds of latent fire. Indeed, and seest thou not, when near the nightly lamps thou bringest a flaxen wick, extinguished a moment since, it catches fire before 'thas touched the flame, and in same wise a torch. And many another object flashes aflame when at a distance, touched by heat alone, before 'tis steeped in veritable fire. This, then, we must suppose to come to pass in that spring also. Now to other things. And I'll begin to treat by what decree of nature it came to pass that iron can be by that stone drawn which Greeks the magnet call, after the country's name, its origin being in country of Magnesian folk. This stone men marvel at, and sure it oft maketh a chain of rings, depending, lo, from off itself. Nay, thou mayest see at times 5 or yet more in order dangling down and swaying in the delicate winds, whilst one depends from other, cleaving to underside, and ilk one feels the stone's own power and bonds, so overmasteringly its power flows down. In things of this sort much must be made sure ere thou account of the thing itself canst give, and the approaches round about must be. Wherefore the more do I exact of thee a mind and ears attent. First, from all things we see soever, evermore must flow, must be discharged and strewn about bodies that strike the eyes, awaking sight. From certain things flow odors evermore, as cold from rivers, heat from sun, and spray from waves of ocean, eater out of walls along the coasts. Nor ever cease to seep the varied echoings through the air. Then, too, there comes into the mouth at times the wet of a salt taste, when by the sea we roam about. And so, whene'er we watch the wormwood being mixed, its bitter stings. To such degree from all things is each thing borne streamingly along, and sent about to every region round, and nature grants nor rest nor respites of the onward flow, since 'tis incessantly we feeling have, and all the time are suffered to descry and smell all things at hand, and hear them sound. Now will I seek again to bring to mind how porous a body all things have, a fact made manifest in my first canto too. For truly, though to know this doth import for many things, yet for this very thing on which straightway I'm going to discourse, 'tis needful most of all to make it sure that naught's at hand but body mixed with void. A first ensample. In grottos, rocks o'erhead sweat moisture and distill the oozy drops. Likewise from all our body seeps the sweat. There grows the beard, and along our members all, and along our frame, the hairs. Through all our veins disseminates the foods, and gives increase and aliment down to the extreme parts, even to the tiniest fingernails. Likewise, through solid bronze, the cold and fiery heat we feel to pass. Likewise, we feel them pass through gold, through silver, when we clasp in hand the brimming goblets. And again, there flit voices through houses hedging walls of stone. Odor seeps through, and cold, and heat of fire that's wont to penetrate even strength of iron. Again, where corslet of the sky girds round, and at same time some influence of bane, when from beyond 'thas stolen into our world, and tempests, gathering from the earth and sky, back to the sky and earth absorbed retire. With reason, since there's naught that's fashioned not with body porous. Furthermore, not all the particles which be from things thrown off are furnished with same qualities for sense, nor be for all things equally adapt. A first ensample: the sun doth bake and parch the earth, but ice he thaws, and with his beams compels the lofty snows, upreared white upon the lofty hills, to waste away. Then wax, if set beneath the heat of him, melts to a liquid. And the fire, likewise, will melt the copper and will fuse the gold, but hides and flesh it shrivels up and shrinks. The water hardens the iron just off the fire, but hides and flesh, made hard by heat, it softens. The oleaster tree as much delights the bearded she-goats, verily, as though 'twere nectar steeped and shed ambrosia, than which is naught that burgeons into leaf more bitter food for man. A hog draws back for marjoram oil, and every unguent fears. Fierce poison these unto the bristled hogs. Yet unto us from time to time they seem, as 'twere, to give new life. But, contrariwise, though unto us the mire be filth most foul, to hogs that mire doth so delightsome seem that they, with wallowing from belly to back, are never cloyed. A point remains besides, which best it seems to tell of, ere I go to telling of the fact at hand itself. Since to the varied things assigned be the many pores, those pores must be diverse in nature one from other, and each have its very shape, its own direction fixed. And so indeed in breathing creatures be the several senses, of which each takes in unto itself, in its own fashion ever, its own peculiar object. For we mark how sounds do into one place penetrate, into another flavors of all juice, and savor of smell into a third. Moreover, one sort through rocks we see to seep, and lo, one sort to pass through wood, another still through gold, and others to go out and off through silver and through glass. For we do see through some pores form and look of things to flow, through others heat to go, and some things still to speedier pass than others through same pores. Of verity, the nature of these same paths, varying in many modes, as aforesaid, because of unlike nature and warp and woof of cosmic things, constrains it so to be. Wherefore, since all these matters now have been established and settled well for us as premises prepared, for what remains 'twill not be hard to render clear account by means of these, and the whole cause reveal, whereby the magnet lures the strength of iron. First, stream there must from off the lodestone seeds innumerable, a very tide, which smites by blows that air asunder lying betwixt the stone and iron. And when is emptied out this space, and a large place between the two is made a void. Forthwith the primal germs of iron, headlong slipping, fall conjoined into the vacuum, and the ring itself, by reason thereof, doth follow after, and go thuswise with all its body. And naught there is that of its own primordial elements, more thoroughly knit or tighter linked, coheres than nature and cold roughness of stout iron. Wherefore 'tis less a marvel what I said, that from such elements no bodies can from out the iron collect in larger throng, and be into the vacuum borne along, without the ring itself do follow after. And this it does, and followeth on until 't'hath reached the stone itself, and cleaved to it by links invisible. Moreover, likewise, the motion's assisted by a thing of aid, whereby the process easier becomes, namely by this: as soon as rarer grows that air in front of the ring, and space between is emptied more and made a void, forthwith it happens all the air that lies behind conveys it onward, pushing from the rear. For ever doth the circumambient air drub things unmoved. But here it pushes forth the iron, because upon one side the space lies void, and thus receives the iron in. This air, whereof I am reminding thee, winding athrough the iron's abundant pores so subtly into the tiny parts thereof, shoves it and pushes, as wind the ship and sails. The same doth happen in all directions forth. From whatso side a space is made a void, whether from crosswise or above, forthwith the neighbor particles are borne along into the vacuum. For of verity they're set a-going by poundings from elsewhere, nor by themselves of own accord can they rise upwards into the air. Again, all things must in their framework hold some air, because they are of framework porous, and the air encompasses and borders on all things. Thus, then, this air in iron, so deeply stored, is tossed evermore in vexed motion, and therefore drubs upon the ring sans doubt, and shakes it up inside. In sooth, that ring is thither borne along to where 'thas once plunged headlong, thither low, unto the void whereto it took its start. It happens, too, at times, that nature of iron shrinks from this stone away, accustomed by turns to flee and follow. Yea, I've seen those Samothracian iron rings leap up, and iron filings in the brazen bowls seethe furiously, when underneath was set the magnet stone. So strongly iron seems to crave to flee that rock. Such discord great is gendered by the interposed brass, because, forsooth, when first the tide of brass hath seized upon and held possession of the iron's open passageways, thereafter cometh the tide of the stone, and in that iron findeth all spaces full, nor now hath holes to swim through as before. 'Tis thus constrained with its own current gainst the iron's fabric to dash and beat, by means whereof it spews forth from itself, and through the brass stirs up the things which otherwise, without the brass, it sucks into itself. In these affairs marvel thou not that from this stone the tide prevails not likewise other things to move with its own blows. For some stand firm by weight, as gold, and some cannot be moved forever, because so porous in their framework they, that there the tide streams through without a break, of which sort stuff of wood is seen to be. Therefore, when iron, which lies between the two, hath taken in some atoms of the brass, then do the streams of that Magnesian rock move iron by their smitings. Yet These things are not so alien from others, that I of this same sort am ill prepared to name ensamples still of things exclusively to one another adapt. Thou seest first how lime alone cementeth stones, how wood only by glue of bull with wood is joined, so firmly, too, that oftener the boards crack open along the weakness of the grain, ere ever those taurine bonds will lax their hold. The vine-born juices with the water springs are bold to mix, though not the heavy pitch with the light oil of olive. And purple dye of shellfish so uniteth with the wool's body alone, that it cannot be ta'en away for ever. Nay, though thou gavest toil to restore the same with the Neptunian flood, nay, though all ocean willed to wash it out with all its waves. Again, gold unto gold doth not one substance bind, and only one? And is not brass by tin joined unto brass? And other ensamples, how many might one find? What then? Nor is there unto thee a need of such long ways and round about, nor boots it for me much toil on this to spend. More fit it is in few words briefly to embrace things many. Things whose textures fall together so mutually adapt, that cavities to solids correspond, these cavities of this thing to the solid parts of that, and those of that to solid parts of this. Such joinings are the best. Again, some things can be the one with other coupled and held, linked by hooks and eyes, as 'twere. And this seems more the fact with iron and this stone. Now, of diseases, what the law, and whence the influence of bane upgathering can upon the race of men and herds of cattle kindle a devastation fraught with death, I will unfold. And first, I've taught above that seeds there be of many things to us life-giving, and that, contrariwise, there must fly many round, bringing disease and death. When these have, haply, chanced to collect and to derange the atmosphere of earth, the air becometh baneful. And lo, all that influence of bane, that pestilence, or from beyond down through our atmosphere, like clouds and mists, descends, or else collects from earth herself and rises, when, assoak and beat by rains unseasonable and suns, our earth hath then contracted stench and rot. Seest thou not also that whoso arrive in region far from fatherland and home are, by the strangeness of the clime and waters, distempered, since conditions vary much? For in what else may we suppose the clime among the Britons to differ from Egypt's own, where totters awry the axis of the world? Or in what else to differ Pontic clime from Gades, and from climes adown the south, on to black generations of strong men with sun-baked skins? Even as we thus do see 4 climes diverse under the 4 main winds, and under the 4 main regions of the sky, so too are seen the colour and face of men vastly to disagree, and fixed diseases to seize the generations, kind by kind. There is the elephant disease, which down in midmost Egypt, hard by streams of Nile, engendered is, and never otherwhere. In Attica the feet are oft attacked, and in Achaean lands the eyes. And so the divers spots to divers parts and limbs are noxious. 'Tis a variable air that causes this. Thus, when an atmosphere, alien by chance to us, begins to heave, and noxious airs begin to crawl along, they creep and wind like unto mist and cloud, slowly, and everything upon their way they disarrange and force to change its state. It happens, too, that when they've come at last into this atmosphere of ours, they taint and make it like themselves and alien. Therefore, a sudden this devastation strange, this pestilence upon the waters falls, or settles on the very crops of grain, or other meat of men and feed of flocks. Or it remains a subtle force, suspense in the atmosphere itself. And when therefrom we draw our inhalations of mixed air, into our body equally its bane also we must suck in. In manner like, oft comes the pestilence upon the kine, and sickness too upon the sluggish sheep. Nor aught it matters whether journey we to regions adverse to ourselves, and change the atmospheric cloak, or whether nature herself import a tainted atmosphere to us, or something strange to our own use, which can attack us soon as ever it come. End of Book 6, Part 3. Recording by Daniel Vimont, Osaka, Japan. Book 6, Part 4 of On the Nature of Things by Titus Lucretius Carus, translated by William Ellery Leonard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Daniel Vimont. Book 6, Part 4. The Plague. Athens. 'Twas such a manner of disease, 'twas such mortal miasma in Cecropian lands. Whilom reduced the plains to dead men's bones, unpeopled the highways, drained of citizens the Athenian town. For coming from afar, rising in lands of Egypt, traversing reaches of air and floating fields of foam, at last on all Pandion's folk it swooped, whereat by troops unto disease and death were they o'ergiven. At first they'd bear about a skull on fire with heat, and eyeballs twain red with suffusion of blank glare. Their throats black on the inside, sweated oozy blood, and the walled pathway of the voice of man was clogged with ulcers, and the very tongue, the mind's interpreter, would trickle gore, weakened by torments, tardy, rough to touch. Next, when that influence of bane had chalked down through the throat, the breast, and streamed had e'en into sullen heart of those sick folk, then, verily, all the fences of man's life began to topple. From the mouth the breath would roll a noisome stink, as stink to heaven rotting cadavers flung unburied out. And lo, thereafter all the body's strength and every power of mind would languish, now in very doorway of destruction. And anxious anguish and ululation, mixed with many a groan, companioned alway the intolerable torments. Night and day recurrent spasms of vomiting would rack alway their thews and members, breaking down with sheer exhaustion men already spent. And yet on no one's body couldst thou mark the skin with o'ermuch heat to burn aglow, but rather The body unto touch of hands would offer a warmish feeling, and thereby show red all over, with ulcers, so to say, inbranded, like the sacred fires o'erspread along the members. The inward parts of men, in truth, would blaze unto the very bones. A flame, like flame in furnaces, would blaze within the stomach. Nor couldst aught apply unto their members light enough and thin for shift of aid, but coolness and a breeze, ever and ever. Some would plunge those limbs on fire with bane into the icy streams, hurling the body naked into the waves. Many would headlong fling them deeply down the water pits, tumbling with eager mouth already agape. The insatiable thirst that whelmed their parched bodies, lo, would make a goodly shower seem like to scanty drops. Respite of torment was there none. Their frames, forespent, lay prone. With silent lips of fear would medicine mumble low, the while she saw so many a time men roll their eyeballs round, staring wide open, unvisited of sleep, the heralds of old death. And in those months was given many another sign of death. The intellect of mind by sorrow and dread deranged, the sad brow, the countenance fierce and delirious, the tormented ears beset with ringings, the breath quick and short, or huge and intermittent, soaking sweat a-glisten on neck, the spittle in fine gouts tainted with colour of crocus, and so salt, the cough scarce wheezing through the rattling throat. Ay, and the sinews in the fingered hands were sure to contract, and sure the jointed frame to shiver, and up from feet the cold to mount inch after inch, and toward the supreme hour at last the pinched nostrils, nose's tip a very point, eyes sunken, temples hollow, skin cold and hard, the shuddering grimace, the pulled and puffy flesh above the brows. Oh, not long after would their frames lie prone in rigid death. And by about the 8th resplendent light of sun, or at the most on the 9th flaming of his flambeau, they would render up the life. If any then had scaped the doom of that destruction, yet him there awaited in the after days a wasting, and a death from ulcers vile, and black discharges of the belly, or else through the clogged nostrils would there ooze along much fouled blood, oft with an aching head. Hither would stream a man's whole strength and flesh. And whoso had survived that virulent flow of the vile blood, yet into thews of him, and into his joints and very genitals would pass the old disease. And some there were, dreading the doorways of destruction so much, lived on, deprived by the knife of the male member. Not a few, though lopped of hands and feet, would yet persist in life, and some there were who lost their eyeballs. Oh, so fierce a fear of death had fallen on them. And some, besides, were by oblivion of all things seized, that even themselves they knew no longer. And though corpse on corpse lay piled, unburied on ground, the race of birds and beasts would or spring back, scurrying to escape the virulent stench, or if they'd tasted there, would languish in approaching death. But yet hardly at all during those many suns appeared a fowl, nor from the woods went forth the sullen generations of wild beasts. They languished with disease, and died and died. In chief, the faithful dogs, in all the streets outstretched, would yield their breath distressfully, for so that influence of bane would twist life from their members. Nor was found one sure and universal principle of cure. For what to one had given the power to take the vital winds of air into his mouth, and to gaze upward at the vaults of sky, the same to others was their death and doom. In those affairs, awfulest of all, pitiable most was this. Whoso once saw himself in that disease entangled, aye, as damned unto death, would lie in wan hope with a sullen heart, would, in forevision of his funeral, give up the ghost, then and there. For lo, at no time did they cease one from another to catch contagion of the greedy plague, as though but woolly flocks and horned herds. And this in chief would heap the dead on dead. For who forbore to look to their own sick, these, too eager of life, of death afeard, would then, soon after, slaughtering neglect visit, with vengeance of evil death and base, themselves deserted and forlorn of help. But who had stayed at hand would perish there by that contagion, and the toil which then a sense of honor and the pleading voice of weary watchers, mixed with voice of wail of dying folk, forced them to undergo. This kind of death each nobler soul would meet. The funerals, uncompanioned, forsaken, like rivals contended to be hurried through, and men, contending to in sepulchre pile upon pile the throng of their own dead, and weary with woe and weeping wandered home. And then the most would take to bed from grief, nor could be found not one whom nor disease, nor death, nor woe had not in those dread times attacked. By now the shepherds and neat-herds all, yea, even the sturdy guiders of curved ploughs, began to sicken, and their bodies would lie, huddled within back corners of their huts, delivered by squalor and disease to death. Often and often couldst thou then have seen on lifeless children lifeless parents prone, or offspring on their father's mother's corpse yielding the life. And into the city poured, not in least part from the countryside, that tribulation, which the peasantry sick brought thither, thronging from every quarter, plague-stricken mob. All places would they crowd, all buildings too, whereby the more would death up-pile a heap the folk so crammed in town. Many a body thirst had dragged and rolled along the highways, there was lying, strewn besides Silenus-headed water fountains, the life-breath choked from that too dear desire of pleasant waters. Everywhere along the open places of the populace, and along the highways, thou mightest see of many a half-dead body the sagged limbs, rough with squalor, wrapped around with rags, perish from very nastiness, with naught but skin upon the bones, well nigh already buried in ulcers vile and obscene filth. All holy temples, too, of deities had death becrammed with the carcasses, and stood each fane of the celestial ones laden with stark cadavers everywhere, places which warders of the shrines had crowded with many a guest. For now no longer men did mightily esteem the old divine, the worship of the gods. The woe at hand did overmaster. Nor in the city, then, remained those rites of sepulture with which that pious folk had evermore been wont to buried be. For it was wildered all in wild alarms, and each and every one with sullen sorrow would bury his own dead, as present shift allowed. And sudden stress and poverty to many an awful act impelled, and with a monstrous screaming they would, on the frames of alien funeral pyres, place their own kin, and thrust the torch beneath, oft brawling with much bloodshed round about, rather than quit dead bodies loved in life. End of Book 6, Part 4. Recording by Daniel Vimont, Osaka, Japan. End of On the Nature of Things by Titus Lucretius Carus. Translated by William Ellery Leonard.